much like we talked about yesterday, that supervisor checklist, that's not necessarily required, that's there as a resource.
Right.
But for this type of document, when we think about requesting it or a disciplinary enforcement issue, wouldn't we want to require people to do it, not make it voluntary? Just for ease
No,
of.
I don't think so. I don't think we want to require that it be submitted on a.
Not required to be submitted, but required that it get completed. Because if we ask
I
for
mean, that
documentation.
it's required to be completed on a form. We don't, I don't think we want to put it in here. Okay,
Beyond
go
putting it
ahead.
here, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking practicality. If we're asking, so when we get to that point of submitting proof upon request, wouldn't we want the proof to be more uniform? Because if you're going back a couple of years, if people have things different, we've shown what they have to do, and we'll give them the guidance through
Right.
a document. But if we didn't require people to have that done, I wonder if it would be harder. I guess that's my question, to be able to review.
Well, here's the thing, I mean, I can see that we can maybe have a form attached to, I mean, I don't think it should be part of the regulations, I'm gonna say. But that's just my personal opinion. And I can see that we can create forms for them to attach to the documentation, but part of, at least for some of the documentation, we're talking about submit an abstract, do a, submit,
Proof of publication.
proof of publication, submit a syllabus. These aren't things that go on a form.
No, but you'd have a checklist where you just say that's what you did.
Fine.
But I'm just saying, Mrs. Mark's question is making me think about it. If we don't put it here, it becomes voluntary as opposed to required to have, a 1-page or 2-pager of a listing of activities.
One thing we could do, this might solve both issues, is as part of the renewal process, we could come up with something like this log that wouldn't be in regulation, but we would be providing it in the renewal packets, and we could say, you can, you don't have to, you can use this to keep track of your continuing education hours. So it's not required.
CPD.
CPD hours.
No, I get that. So I guess the question to staff, is that okay for you? Because when Ms. Marks asked the question, I just consider in terms of the practical administrative functions.
Right.
If most people didn't do that form, would that be problematic for staff? Beyond our desire to have it here or not, I guess is my question really.
Okay, well, Kim,
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Ms. Noonan, because she'll be the primary one looking through this, but also, I think we definitely want to provide this. I mean, I think our issue is, do we want it written in here? Because then it would be required.
Exactly.
And.
And it could also not evolve.
And it
So if we wanted to
Well, I don't think we
simplify
ought to
it.
say the reference of it, I don't think we ought to say
No,
the date
no,
of it,
that's why I'm
but,
saying we don't
yeah.
include it in the regulations so we can allow it to evolve, to respond to things as licensees say, well, this doesn't, part of the form doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
We can change it. If it's in regs, we'd have to change the regulations in
Right.
order to do it, so.
And let me just say this, I see that what we want to do, I'm looking at our council who's giving me a different face, it's making me concerned because in terms of what we can then have done, and so
Then let's ask.
have staff and legal counsel, because I feel like that's where that's where I'm kind of leaning towards.
So Ms. Noonan, if it comes in as we've described, how does this come into you? Does this make it more difficult? If we had an easy checklist or something and we say that, all your documentation must be accompanied by a checklist, a checklist provided by the board or something, and not specify the title or the date or anything like that, which I don't know if we can do, we can't do, so there you go.
I really like Ms. Sorik's suggestion to put it in the renewal application. I think licensees, what I've noticed so far is that they appreciate formality and they appreciate tools that we give them. And like Ms. Johnson was saying, they use the
Supervision agreement form.
Yeah.
it's not in regulation, but they use it all the time.
So it's not in regs, but
Right.
they use it,
Everybody
so we
uses
can
it.
provide it for them to use, and they will.
I don't think there will be any pushback for a streamlined process in terms of using a form, and I like the idea of putting it in the renewal.
Ms. Noonan, just so I understand, if they were to submit that form, they're also gonna have to submit all the supporting,
All the documents.
all the supporting documentation, correct? So if they have CE certificates, they're gonna have to give you the CE certificates.
Correct, that's correct.
Right, right,
Mhm, mhm.
okay, that's,
So it's just gonna be kind of a check of what they have or what they've done, but then they're gonna have to submit stuff with that.
Right.
So then my question would be, if you didn't have a checklist as a cover sheet, would that be problematic to figure out where people are, what they're submitting?
My fear is that what's going to happen is I'm going to get something on a piece of paper that says, I read this book, and there's not going to be amount of time that they did it, there's not going to be the title specifically,
So
or,
if we do forms that we can put in their
Yeah.
packets, but not in regulations, that would take care of that.
I would like that, yeah.
Okay. All right.
And so we're all in agreement, Ms. Marks, is that, I mean, does she feel it need to have it in regs? And I know why we're saying we could give that and we don't have to push back, people like formality.
Mhm.
I guess my question would be then why wouldn't we just make it formalized in the regs?
Because she just said, we can't without actually putting a date on it, a title, and so then that makes it frozen, then we can't change it. If we provide it for them.
But
they're
if
gonna
but the
use
changes that would happen to it
Yeah.
would change the language also here that would require other changes.
Not necessarily.
If
Well,
I may-
it might.
To your point, Ms. Jones, a form that is in regulations is completely frozen. So even just a reorganization of the layout of the form, because to make it more user-friendly, if we hear complaints from licensees saying, you know, this part really isn't that easy to understand, it would take an entire reg package just to change that one form. So that is the hindrance of it.
I really get what you guys are saying. I'm just going to kind of give you my feedback on it, which is, if nothing else, this summary verification form that set out the categories and the activities with the numbers, because I think I have seen those excuses of people who say, oh, I thought I had 36, I had all this paperwork. This makes them add it up. Where did you think the 36 came from? They're kind of forced to say, I had this many hours here, this many hours here, yes, okay, I have at least this category, and I have at least this category. So I have two categories, it adds up to 36 at the bottom. And then whatever you want to do with the documentation, if you don't want to require the detailed verification forms, I think that's fine. I think this is a kind of a visual aid for everyone involved, including the staff, to say, okay, here's the pure consultation. What's the attached documentation to support that? Here's the supervision. What's the attached documentation for that? So they're not guessing where the hours are supposed to come from. Okay, the staff isn't, but it's if they don't think they need it.
The issue for us, this is what we're asking. We're fine with the forms. Do we need to put it here? If we put it here, it can't change. That's our question. If we can provide the form and put it with the package, tell people to, do that, and, I mean,
I don't know
if
that-
we have to add it later, I guess I'm more of the mind, if we find out after going through this that it's, it really is a little cumbersome, we're providing this stuff for them, but they're not using it, then we don't have to go back and, that's different to me, to add it versus take it away.
And I guess where I would go with that now a little bit is, and I get what you're saying, is if you have to amend it, you have to go through a rulemaking package to do that. But if you add it, you have to do that anyway.
That's what I said, but it feels different to me to add something because we see, we do need this, because people aren't taking advantage of it and aren't using it, then that'll just kind of keep going the same way. But if we're requiring them to use something that ends up being cumbersome, it's just the way I'm thinking about it, then that's a harder process.
So it could be that we try a pilot for, let's say, 2 years we send this form out with the renewal saying at the bottom that this is not required, but you may use this to document your hours. If Ms. Noonan is finding that she's not getting a lot of these forms, or people are having a hard time submitting their verification of the hours, then we can always add that into the reg and say, this is now required. If we find that we've made it optional, you're not taking advantage of it, or you're not keeping good documentation on your own and we're having a hard time communicating the requirements, then we add it in.
And by that, well, and the advantage of that is also by that point, to the extent we've gotten feedback from licensees about the form and whether it's usable or not usable or what needs to be changed about it, well, the form will have actually evolved into a point where we may be more comfortable putting it in the regs. So that would be my preference as well.
I just think about the conversation we had this morning about confusion and clarity. The process to add it would be the same process as changing it to remove it. And I just wonder, as we embark upon something that's such a change, why would we not give direction as a part of that? So I'm okay with us moving forward without it. I think that Ms. Mark's question gave me the pause to say, if we want to make sure that we're giving people guidance, and if it's, and I think the simplified form that Ms. Marks was mentioning, just the category and what the type is not going to change unless we change the language in that section that determines what the actual CPD includes. So I don't see, I get the issue about making it nicer, layout different, but that kind of information is so basic that and I feel like in terms of being able to review however many we're gonna have to review, it seems like it would be easier, but I'm okay with moving forward in the interest of time, but I do think that we shouldn't try to just do it faster, because if we add it, it would be the same kind of process to add it through the reg change.
I completely get that. I think it's also the sense of being micromanaged a bit. I mean, that's some feedback that we've gotten, and I want to be responsive to that too. And that's a little bit of what I'm thinking about. And you know, these are definite regulations. We do, I mean, we're putting it in here, we are making this change, and we want people to follow it, but at the same time, it's like how much, I don't think people are going to be confused. I think especially if we give them this to use, it'll give us a little trial period, and then we can see.
I don't think that's micromanaging. I think we also heard in the process people wanting to have clarity.
They want clarity, and I think we're giving them clarity.
So I'm going to disagree. I don't think that's micromanaging for the firm, but I'm okay with moving forward. I think that we can do the trial and provide it, but.
Okay, so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna leave it out of, we are gonna take a look at that form, because we want it to have all the stuff that we've added, you know, maximums and minimums, have people count it up, but it'll be an easy checklist for them, and it'll guide you as you look through their stuff, okay? And then we'll try that for a couple of years, so we're talking 4 years away. Who knows, right now, so. Okay, let's move on to what is the top of page 13.
So that's gonna be now L, M, and N, correct? At the top of page 13?
Yeah,
Okay.
because this was K, right? That hadn't changed. Is that right?
It might be M, N, and O, because the numbering, lettering might be wrong on here because of the previous change, the student pointed it out.
Okay,
But it's gonna be reviewed.
okay,
Because we ended up, we'll put it to,
yeah.
Yeah, I
Right
just
here.
changed that from 2 L's to L and N, but it might be M and O.
Okay, so L, no approved course may be taken and claimed more than once during a renewal period for continuing education credit. We say this is explained in the definition. Do we need to say it again? That's the question from staff. Would it be a good reminder to have it in here again, or? Do we need to say it at all? Where is it in the definitions? $13.97. I see where we talk about teaching or taking, we can't include that, that can't be done twice. A person can't double dip, but I don't see anywhere
I
here,
don't either.
unless I'm missing it, that we've made this statement.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
So,
Perfect.
let's just scratch out this blue.
Okay, I have a separate question, which is, should we move it up to the definitional section? So that they'll be able to look at it all in one fell swoop as opposed to having to look in two different places.
If we do that, I do think, well, either way, I think we want to change
The language?
the language, because this says no approved sponsored CPD coursework, and are we talking about CE? Then that's what it's not CPD coursework. And whatever we're calling it now, what'd you say, approved?
Continuing education.
Yeah, no approved continuing education.
Well, isn't it talking about CPD as a whole? Because we don't want them to claim credit for, let's say, the same peer consultation or the same book. I think it's.
Activity would be better
Yeah.
then we don't want to say approved sponsored
Right.
either, or approved or sponsored. We just want to say no CPD activity.
Mhm.
Then we don't need to roll it anywhere else.
Yeah. Maybe taken,
Maybe,
maybe claimed. We don't need to say taken because it might be given. Maybe claimed more than once during
Is
I'm
it
gonna say-
plain more than one category?
maybe submitted for credit more than once in each.
yeah, may be submitted for credit.
And then
I don't like that. I think claim sounds good.
More than once during a renewal period. Right.
I don't think it should be made submitted because they're not submitting all the time, so it's a claimed, it's a
Claimed
claim.
for credit, used for credit. What are they doing? You're right, they're not submitting it unless we ask them to. So claimed?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Thank you. I know Rosemary.
Or do we want to say used, counted?
We
Count.
changed the use for to credit, we used that,
Yeah.
change the language earlier, I
Yeah.
think claimed is the right language.
Okay.
That's what we've been using throughout.
All right, claimed. So claim for credit more than once during a renewal period. Period. And then we leave it here. Okay. Okay, failure to provide all the information required by this section. So, we are not, what are we requiring for licensure renewal? We're not gonna require the documentation unless they're audited or there's some other reason that the board requests the documentation. We're asking them to keep it. So what are we requiring they provide? Or
Are we saying,
information required?
or are we saying failure to accrue would be, CPD
Mhm.
amount? I mean, that's what the
Yeah,
failure is here,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's what it is.
I can also see it being failure to submit documentation that actually shows the number of hours that you're claiming if there was an audit.
Or failure to check the box that you've done.
But what we're doing right now is just saying, what are we saying? That we've met we have taken 36 hours?
Right, because at the time of renewal, they're not submitting anything, they're just claiming that they've obtained it.
How about just failure to meet all the requirements of this section renders any application for renewal incomplete?
That's good.
Sounds good.
Failure to,
Meet all of the requirements as set forth by this section renders any application for renewal incomplete and not eligible for renewal. Does that work?
It does to some extent. I don't want it to be confused with, and I believe the board is going to move toward pre-renewal audits, but right now I don't think you're there yet. So then the question is whether or not if somebody sends in the renewal, checks the box, yes, I did it, and they, or, and then they're audited, to be clear that you can't undo the renewal at that point. You'd have to move forward with a disciplinary or some kind of enforcement action.
Ms. Marks, does that mean that we should in somewhere in here say that not meeting the requirements may render you subject, or may constitute unprofessional conduct?
I do think I saw it somewhere in there. I'm not sure, I couldn't find it right now, but I do think I could see it there. Or maybe it's in the existing language. But if the board is moving toward pre-renewal audits, then I think the language works just fine.
what? So pre-renewal audits, what does that mean?
I was talking with staff a few weeks ago, and they were talking about moving toward audits prior to renewal so that the board checks the documentation prior to the issuance of the renewal so that they know that it's been met.
Oh, I
As
see.
opposed to after renewal, did you do it? Because then your options are somewhat limited at that point.
Okay, thank you.
You can't undo the renewal once it's been issued.
Understood.
So in that scenario, if that was requested of someone, what's that turnaround time? Because that means that people may not, get renewed in time, which would then argue for having some kind of requirement that you give us a form or something, for fast turnaround. Because if you're doing pre-licensure, how long does a renewal take?
But they're not looking at all the documentation, are you? What are you looking at? In a
Well, we haven't done pre-audits.
This would be a pre-licensure audit, so
Right.
you are asking for documentation at that point.
If we were to move forward with
Yeah.
doing that versus a post, they would be required to submit all of their proof that they've gotten the hours and then be able to renew.
So let's say.
So my question is
Sorry.
What's the
how long
turnaround
that
time?
turnaround time take?
I don't know. That's what we haven't gotten that far.
Currently, when you do a post
Mhm.
audit, how long does that time take?
We give them 60 days to respond. If they don't respond within the first 30 days, we
Gotcha.
don't follow up with review.
Okay, here's my concern.
Mhm.
Does this mean if I'm gonna renew my license, I'm gonna need to renew my license 4 months ahead of time so that you guys have time to send me the notice that you wanna do an audit and then give me the time to accumulate the paperwork and then send it to you? Maybe there's a second notice involved?
Our thought process was when the renewal was being mailed out, so 75 days before the license expires, it would then notify them, hey, you've been selected for an audit, please submit your documentation so you can renew. So it wouldn't require you to renew at that point, you would just have to supply your documentation before you could actually renew.
So 75 days is a little over 3 months.
It's
Is that right? 2
Two-
months.
Two and a half
2.5
months that they're given that time frame to renew the license. That's how early they can renew, 75 days before it
Right.
expires.
But some people might still have some
Hours.
hours that they
Mhm.
need to get, so what
Right.
happens with them?
And we haven't even fully discussed a pre-audit at all, what the requirements would be if we even want to do that. We haven't
Okay.
worked out the,
All right, so then we need to think maybe a different way to say this. And because we're not there yet, and y'all really
Mhm.
haven't decided whether you even want to do it yet. So I think we
Right.
do have to say a way, because you're right, we can't unrenew after we renew. So if they're selected for audit, so I do think we ought to say in here, like, subject to disciplinary. I mean, we've said it in other places, but I don't know if that was yesterday now, or, that's what I'm thinking.
I don't think we should do it as a pre-audit.
Yeah, it was a whole different part.
It's on the top of page 7, 1397.61A. It says, a psychologist who falsifies or makes a material misrepresentation of fact on a renewal application, or who cannot verify the hours in which he or she engaged in the CPD activities by producing the documentation required by this article whenever requested to do so by the board, is subject to citation or to disciplinary action under 2960 of the code. But Ms. Marks suggested that we could also add in or subject the license renewal to a hold, or I don't know how we.
Subject to non-renewal of the license, or citation, or something along those lines.
And take this one out here, but add that language there. Is that what you're saying? Ms. Jones?
Yeah, Ms. Marks, because the other thing that you said before, you said if it was here, the language we talked about yesterday, I liked that language better about professional conduct. I think this is right here, that's on page 7, but what Ms. Marks was starting to go with before, when, I feel like that language I like it a lot, that we used a couple times yesterday.
And it says 2960 of the code, which is unprofessional conduct, but that may not be clear to everybody reading that
So we
read,
should spell it
so.
out, yeah.
Are we modifying page 7, you believe?
So, yeah, that's where I think we want it, and we want to word it like we worded yesterday about unprofessional conduct and subject to discipline by the board, I think. But also, we need to say license renewal and or discipline by the board, right?
Dr. Hart,
Yes,
can I ask you a question about this?
please come up.
I'm a little confused at this point. So the notion of the pre-audit is that's the first anybody's heard about that, I suppose, which raises all kinds of questions. Beth?
I'm sorry, I may have thrown a monkey wrench into it, it was just.
Maybe. I mean, it was.
So I don't speak for the staff, it was just something that I wanted to address because I
Right.
believe that was the way the staff was going towards, so please, I don't speak for the staff, and I'm sorry if I created any confusion.
Well, I think I understand what you're saying. I think it may create confusion in this conversation because it would mean different things for psychologists if you had to complete all of your requirements. So we maybe don't want to go down that rabbit hole until the rabbit hole is here to go down. I would like to know what the board is thinking about your discussion here, which I think is important, about the ramifications for not being able to demonstrate that you've met the requirements. I think, if I'm recalling correctly, the place you used unprofessional conduct, that language was when you were talking about supervision. I believe that was in the supervision discussion, which was appropriate. So right now, I think one of the things that I was confused about years ago when I first found this out was that there really is no particular penalty for not meeting your CE requirements, except maybe now there is potentially a fine. But it certainly does not stop you from getting your license renewed. Now, whether or not psychologists know that, that's a different thing, and they should meet the requirements because that's what they're required to do. So I think it is important to try and get clarity here about what you're going to ask for and then what happens if. So a person applies for their renewal, and this is why I can see why you might be going down that rabbit hole. They apply for their renewal, they get their license renewed, then it turns out that they're audited and they didn't meet their CE requirements. And then it's sort of like, well, okay, and now you have time to remedy that, right? Or no, you don't have time to remedy it. We've had this discussion, we had this discussion a few months ago at another licensing committee meeting. So if through an honest mistake or a mistake of a provider or something else, it turns out that you haven't met your requirements, you don't even have a chance to remedy that, and yet you still have your license. And so we talked about what the options were, and I think one option is to ask for a hearing, or you may get a fine. So this might be a good place to try and clarify. So what are, the requirements? I think we're getting close to having a lot of clarity on what the requirements are. But the other piece about, well, what happens if you're not compliant, I think is still kind of murky to me, at least. And then, because kind of going back to your discussion of the form, I think where the notion of micromanagement comes in and where the perception is not that there's a checklist or a form. It's whether or not the documentation that's going to be required, the quote-unquote supporting documentation, is too burdensome and can seem a little bit paternalistic. But I do think that if I were going to do this, if we decided, for example, at CPA that we were going to increase our capacity in the CE bank, which is available to psychologists, so that we are going to help them keep track, I think we would create a form. We would create a thing that said, okay, well, here are the categories, and here are the hours that you're allowed to get in each category, and here's a place where you can fill in what you did. And as Ms. Marks said, count them up. And okay, well, you've already got all you can use in here. You can't don't do any more in that area. So if we were going to be providing that feedback, I think the form is not the issue. It's how much you feel like you're having to justify and back up and so forth. So, it's kind of going back to that. Although I will say that form in MCEP that was in the regs, where we wanted to just, based on feedback, change, I don't know, like a period here and there, we could not do it because it would have taken a reg change. And everybody went, well, that's sure not worth it. So that's the downside of having anything. But having a form, I think, is a good idea. Having the form in regs, maybe not so good.
Right.
I think
That's-
we're definitely going to
all
have.
on the
Yeah,
same
we're
I
definitely
thought
on
you
the same
agreed.
page there.
Yeah.
And we're definitely cognizant of the fact that sometimes on the form, as it existed in the past.
As it exists in the,
It asks for
yes.
rationales and
Too
things
much.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
Should not.
And it's clear, and I want to emphasize what you said at the beginning of this meeting, Dr. Phillips, and that is for anyone watching, that what is currently in the packet is not what is going to be there. You are still working on this. You are still working through this. And you've already said multiple times today that form and all of the requirements, it's going away. So I think that it is confusing to have the old stuff and the current stuff and the new stuff all happening at the same time. There's no way around it. I understand that. But it's just really important that people who are listening or watching understand that this is a work in progress. And as you said at the beginning, you went back basically to square one.
Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Can I add one other thing? This is the first I've ever heard of a pre-renewal audit. And I think before staff starts to consider this change in procedure, this needs to be brought to the board, for the board to discuss and think through the implications of it, because it does have very substantial implications.
but that's not where they're going. They haven't even thought about it, and it probably would be brought to the board. I mean, they thought about it, but I mean, I think they would follow what they're supposed to do.
And I'm not trying to chastise staff, I'm just trying to sensitize people to the fact that would be like a sea change.
Yeah.
And that really would need to be looked at.
Right. So what we want to do in this part,
But isn't that what MCPA did? Was MCPAA, isn't that what they did, is they assured, they actually checked all of the CE before the renewals were due?
no,
Yeah, they did.
oh yeah, they did, they gave us how much we had.
And they would send you a form in the mail that showed you,
And I
yeah.
believe they then told the board which licenses were not eligible for renewal.
But we're talking about a much different scheme here than just continuing education hours.
Oh, you mean internal?
Psychologists and falsified.
They talked, like, and talked about this and like very loosely, like it was just kind of features. I'm not for it, but I just think that it will complicate the process because some people wait till the last day. And it's not, we shouldn't, people remember this. 2 years. Yeah, and that's, and at that point, it's kind of like treating them unfairly.
You're
Like
saying
getting
a
those people selected
psychologist
for audit
would be
last time to
considered
get their own.
unprofessional.
Yeah, that's, it's a psychologist's behavior.
Get a license. I can't.
Like said action shall be considered.
Period. Well, and my, they can't, they terminate my license, I have to.
May be subjected to disciplinary
So
action
when you renew,
or
you submit your paperwork,
before
you better guarantee that you're getting your hours done before you
I
get
was trying to use
Yeah, I would say maybe
and you can pay them, you can,
disciplinary action.
or the non-renewal
Or
of the
the,
license.
or
be
the
provider to
non-renewal.
get the certificate, like a week or 2 days, a week, but it should.
Right, you said action shall be considered unprofessional conduct.
Yeah, but first
So
we,
it's like,
first we're talking about the psychologist, so first thing we want to do is that if the psychologist doesn't do this, then that psychologist
you're looking
may
for,
be
you're getting.
subjected to disciplinary action or
Non-renewal of the license.
non-renewal of his or her license. And then,
Or how about we just, instead of a psychologist starting out with falsifying or making material misrepresentation, shall we consider unprofessional conduct, blah, blah, blah,
yeah,
instead of.
that's good. That's good. Falsifying.
Making,
Do you want material misrepresentations or a material misrepresentation?
one or more material misrepresentations?
Yeah, pluralize it and take out.
Or failing to verify the hours.
Shall be considered unprofessional conduct.
Want to leave it at
Delete.
Can we just go from hours to shall? Is that too much
That's,
padding?
that's what I just, myself, so that's, if you did that, or failure to verify the hours shall be considered unprofessional conduct.
Yeah. Because they're verifying the hours by the document.
Well, I think we should still say something about the documentation.
Oh, she texted me. She said she's there.
I'm just trying to make it simple and clear.
You want to get rid of it up until there.
Yeah.
And then-
Yeah, leave it like that.
For 1 second, could we say failing to supply documentation to verify the hours?
Yeah,
I mean, they verify the hours by studying it.
or
Okay,
failing
so-
to supply.
So, whenever requested by the, to do so by the board, keep that in there and then get rid of the rest.
Or failing to verify the hours whenever requested
No,
to
failing
do
to
so
provide
by
the-
the board.
Well, I think failing to provide the documentation to verify the hours when it is requested by the board.
highlight unfortunately. So this part's okay to get rid of, right here.
Yeah, because you're just gonna say the documentation before, failing to
Provide
provide
documentation.
documentation verifying the hours, right?
Failing to provide.
So you're just missing a two between failing to provide. Failing to provide documentation.
Verify the hours.
No, 30.
If requested by the board.
Verifying the hours when requested by the board? So verifying the hours when requested by the board, when requested to do so.
Or failing to provide documentation
To verify the hours.
or verifying the hours.
Yeah, verifying the hours.
No,
Yeah, documentation verifying the hours.
well, I thought you were saying that verifying would be separate. So you-
Failing to provide documentation verifying the hours for falsifying material or failing to provide documentation
Verifying the hours.
verifying the hours. Whenever requested to do so by the board, comma, shall be considered unprofessional conduct and may subject the licensee to disciplinary action.
Render the license null for renewal.
I like that. And render the license ineligible.
You want to get rid of that. And then after action.
Yeah, we want to put it after action, because we don't have that
Oh, right, right,
renewal.
right, right.
It would,
Right, right,
we
right.
would.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you're almost finished wordsmithing that, but I just, and I hate to say this, but I think part of the comments that were just made gave me a little bit of pause too, because it's true that this language, I liked it, and it was used for supervision. When we go to disciplinary guidelines, unprofessional conduct relates to inappropriate behavior that could relate to harm to patients. Is this the same kind of category? I think that's what Dr. Linda Crow was asking that question. So maybe it is just some.
Just
Yeah.
something that we might not consider it unprofessional conduct.
As defined by how we
Right,
define it in
right.
other things. It is not the right thing to do, to
Yeah.
falsify.
So just take out shall be considered, just
So that's a question of
shall
Ms.
be
Marks, right?
considered unprofessional conduct, just say, may subject the licensee to disciplinary action.
But although I don't, is that
May
a
constitute.
policy call on the behalf of the board though? Because I mean, we do have instances where people mark that they are compliant with the CE requirements. They sign that penalty of perjury and they don't have any hours. I mean, we've had that, it's not unheard of.
That's unprofessional conduct.
No, but according to currently, right, that's, it's a misdemeanor to lie, I mean, to falsify, but when we look at our guidelines, I mean, I agree with you, I think it is unprofessional for a lot of reasons, but in terms of how we defined it, is that,
Lying is unprofessional conduct.
What'd you say?
I was trying to remember from my time as a BBS enforcement analyst that there's a general BMP, I think, that defines lying as an unprofessional conduct, I thought.
Marilyn Emos from CDCR. Yes.
Your mic's not on, hold on just 1 second, okay? Your microphone's not on.
Oh. Thank you. I can think of a whole list of motivations from making a mistake to, I thought this type of CPD, that's a professional deformation, as we'd say, would be at the bottom of somebody, particularly at the beginning of this process, submitting materials that wouldn't be sufficient to qualify for CPD. And I think maybe lying might be on that list too, but it might not be at the top of the list. So this is kind of the thing that's been worrying me and my colleagues for a long time, is that initially, with this new kind of material, this is going to be hard for a lot of people to even understand. And they may be thinking they're doing something, and they be putting it in the logs and putting dates and times and all sorts of things. And then the fear is that somebody who is auditing this may come to the conclusion that it's not exactly what CPD constitutes. And I don't know how to kind of ferret this out. We have similar problems in our own organization, where we have to delineate between motivation of falsifying something, or just somebody forgot or misunderstood, or had found that this would be good and it wasn't.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that's why we're kind of stating it the way it is.
Mhm.
You know, we get many more complaints than we actually end up filing accusations.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just talking about in general, you know, to the board. So, I mean, we are going to, those things would be investigated. So if we see it, a licensee or potential licensee, or a licensee is contacted,
Mhm.
hey, you know, what's going on here? Sometimes they can just go, oh gosh, I'm sorry, right? I left that out, or I didn't do this. I'm looking at you just to make sure that, so then it's.
Oh, I've got that in the drawer
Okay,
or whatever,
fine,
yeah, okay.
So, I mean, that's what our staff will do,
Mhm.
you know, but we do want to say that if people are doing this intentionally, there's a consequence.
From sitting on committees in my own organization, sometimes that's hard to ferret out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not hard.
Sometimes it isn't, that's true, and sometimes it is.
No, and I think.
It's a tough part of my job.
My experience so far on the board, and I can only speak for myself, is that in areas where somebody's confused or has got something in the wrong box, we're not going to spend tens of thousands of dollars bringing an accusation against them to take their license away.
Uh-huh.
We're going to treat it as confusion and help them rectify it, and if they can't rectify it, then there might be a citation and fine, there might be a letter, there might be an educational letter. There's a variety of things that might happen. But for the egregious circumstances, we have to provide ourselves with the grounds for being able to bring in disciplinary action, where it's a really severe thing. But
Fraud is one thing, being forgetful is another thing, and
yeah,
there's a lot of
and
stuff in between.
I know there's a lot of fear
Yeah.
that
Yes,
people
there is.
have around the board and the board's attitude toward their licensees. I can tell you that and I've said it in a prior board meeting, it's again my opinion, but we are not the Inquisition. We're not looking to nail people, but when we do find serious lapses in judgment or intentional falsehoods, then we do take the situation very seriously.
I get phone calls and emails also from people who are just worried, and I work through their problem with them, and oftentimes I find there isn't a problem at all. They're just worried.
Right.
And maybe even hypervigilant.
And I think our staff has those same experiences.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's like when people call, if they do call, because a lot of people don't, they just, you know, kind
Worry.
of imagine what's going
Yeah.
to worry and panic and you know. But when they do call, I think, you know, they find out that staff we'll walk them through it, explain it to them if there's anything they don't understand. I mean, that's really part of what they do.
I've also had situations, excuse me, where somebody will call and have misconstrued something in the regs. And so I read through it with them and I help them interpret it and so on.
Thank you.
But you're welcome. It's, there is a lot of angst out there. And I think with this new piece, large piece to license renewal, it's going to be 10 times as much.
So we got a lot of education to
Yep.
do, and you know, it's a process of, you know, the regulatory process takes time, and then we're, at least, you know, how we've got it construed at this point in time, there's going to be a period of changeover that people can use different, you know, go by the old regs or the new regs, so. I mean, those are the kinds of things, you know, and hopefully, obviously, maybe we can't get everybody, but that's definitely part of our process.
Let me just reiterate, I've said this before, I am personally very grateful for the care and caution that you're using in this process. I really appreciate that, and I've also let my colleagues know that this is happening here and that it's not going to be a bolt of lightning from heaven, but that everybody is doing what they can to make sure that the process goes as well as possible. So again, thank you for that.
And thank you for that. Yes.
Really quickly, I'm just wondering if, not to ask for this again, but with subjecting the license to be ineligible for renewal, I'm wondering if you look at an option of if somebody is completely not in compliance and they haven't submitted any hours and they've certified under penalty of perjury that they have, do you want to give yourself that option to be able to do that? Because it does say may, so it gives you the option. You don't have to do that.
I think we do have the option by what it says. We have a range of options, don't we?
Do we need to be more explicit, Ms. Marks, about the ineligibility for renewal, or does the disciplinary action give us broad enough authority to make that determination?
I think disciplinary action is a little more specific, and if you're going to inform the licensees what the potential consequences are of not complying, then you would want to add that it may render their license ineligible for renewal, if that's what you want to do.
So this is after the fact, though. This is when we review. So what we're saying is,
It would
man,
hold up
you
their
lied and,
Renewal. They wouldn't be
Okay,
able to
they won't.
renew until they came into compliance with the requirements.
So 2 years later, they might
2
not
years
get a
later.
license.
You could, I mean, you could be in the middle of an investigation, and part of the investigation, you're asking for their CE, and they're due for renewal, and you find out they don't have any. That might be a situation, I don't know. I mean, I think staff would know a little bit more than I would on that, but I would guess that as part of an investigation, you might actually be checking on whether or not they've completed their CE.
so are you suggesting we do put that in there? Don't just say to disciplinary action, comma, including non-renewal?
Well, that's not
That's not
disciplinary.
disciplinary.
Okay, that's not disciplinary,
No,
that's
I-
enforcement, so it's a different word, is that what it is?
I might say before the shall be, and I'm not even sure to say shall be considered a professional conduct. If you want to keep that idea in there, I would say
Maybe.
may constitute unprofessional conduct.
Yeah, that's good.
But possibly before that, say may render the license ineligible for renewal. And you may have that somewhere else, but I think this is where they sign that they've completed and everything, and then you find out that they haven't before you've actually issued the renewal. So that may be a slightly different situation. If you want to include that idea, you can say before the may render their license ineligible for renewal or may constitute, and may constitute professional conduct subject to license to.
May render license
Ineligible.
ineligible for renewal and may or may,
No, and,
And then you can do either,
because we can do both.
depending on what the situation is.
Yeah.
and may constitute unprofessional conduct. We don't want to say and may again,
And subject
the licensee to
Yeah,
discipline.
and we actually discipline the license, not the licensee, so we subject the license to disciplinary action.
Oh.
Okay. That's good to know.
For a licensee, it's the license.
All right, so we're okay there. Now we are on B. That's before you, okay. No, we're not. We went backwards, didn't we?
Yeah.
It's like, what? Wait a minute. Okay, so now let's see.
I think your question was, should we delete that
Right.
letter M?
Yes,
Which it seems like you should.
yes,
On page 13.
on page 13. So now we're on N, which was now be N, and that's really the timing. For a license that expires between January 1st, 2018, it's 2 years essentially, and December 31st, 2019, licensee may accrue some or all CPD consistent with this section as it existed prior to
These dates.
whenever this goes into effect. So we need to make sure these dates match up to when we get the reg package going and all like that.
So could we just put 2-0 and then put?
Question mark,
question mark?
Yeah, and we'll do that, I guess, all the way through, yeah, depending on where we go. Yeah. Okay, so now this next part is our new part, our old part, and now we're on page 15, 1397.62, continuing education exemptions.
I had a question about this section because I know in 2915 we changed it to include that we'll allow for extensions as well. And there's nothing in our regs that talk about how we're going to offer extensions, so I'm not really sure if that should be included in this section right here.
Continuing education, so we're talking about, well, it shouldn't say continuing education, it should say CPD, continuing
CPD.
professional development exemptions. And so say again, Ms. Noonan, what you said.
In section 2915 of Business and Professions Code, it says that we have the authority to grant an exemption to the CPD requirements in addition to extensions.
Okay.
And we don't have anything in new language that discusses the extension process.
Extension.
And I don't think we've ever offered extensions before, so I'm not really sure what that would look like, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Okay, so in the law, in statute, it says we can,
It's in our extension bill,
in our sunset.
our sunset bill, I'm sorry,
Okay.
extension bill, yeah. I'm
Well,
not
that
sure why.
requires a whole new language and whole new way of thinking. If
Yeah, I'm
we
not
talk
sure where
about
that came from.
extensions
Mhm.
and exemptions.
I don't know why that was.
Which I think, if it says there I guess it doesn't mean we have to, but, I think it's something we should consider if we want to do it. I don't know if we can consider it right now. Y'all want to have a discussion on it now? I'm just trying to think, how, this isn't something I had thought about, so. Thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, because I feel like
Yeah.
in the cases where we've granted extensions for other things,
Yeah.
I could imagine
It makes sense, yeah.
the conversation.
The
coming
only
up.
confusing part that I could see is if somebody were to submit their renewal and ask for an extension to accrue their CPD,
Yeah.
how would that signing under penalty of perjury work? Or would we have to put a notification on our Outlook to say, check with this licensee to make sure they submitted their hours by this date? I just don't know how the extension process would work. I've kind of been muddling through it the whole meeting, trying to figure out, and I just don't I don't know why it was added to 2915. I'm not sure what meeting that was discussed in, but I know that it is in SB 1194.
What does it say in 1194?
So, they can't practice if they're licensed in Well, this leaves a logistic problem. It sounds like it's, might be a fair thing to do, extend or just have an out-and-out exemption. But I think we have to think through it, how to do it. So I don't think we can do it right now. I mean, I really think we have to.
Would you like me to read the
Yeah,
subsection?
thank
So it's 2915G. It says the board may grant an exemption or an extension of the time for compliance with from the continuing professional development requirement of this section.
Okay.
And that's not in current regulation or current statute.
So I guess, I don't know, I want to talk to you all about this, but I think that what I maybe want to hear from staff, and this would have to come back from our next licensing committee meeting. We
Okay.
won't be considering this, for the board for this time. We're not going to be
Right.
bringing it to the board. But to think about how that could happen,
Okay.
given the givens, and to come up with a process that you think might be workable. And then we could, that sound good to y'all? Ask them to do that because, we obviously want you to be able to do it and don't want to create just a mess in terms of what happens or, how could people do that? How could we
Right.
allow that?
Yeah, at this point in time, I don't see how it's feasible to allow somebody to renew and then offer them an extension. I just think that it just convolutes the process.
So,
I would like it to be thought through a little bit
Yeah.
before we start trying to craft
right.
language
Oh, I don't
or
think we
not
can.
craft
Yeah.
language, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this gives us some time to think about it, and y'all think about it, we'll think about it. Dr. Linda Crow, come on up. Come on down.
Chair Linda Crow, California Psychological Association. Well, one of my questions would be, was it intentional to have the word extension in 2915G in 1194? Because that bill is moving right along. I was there this week when it was on the consent agenda in the Assembly Business and Professions Committee. So if it's one thing to talk about these regs and have lots of time, but the bill is going through. So if it wasn't intentional to have it there, then maybe that's something that Ms. Sorick would need to go back and take out of the bill and make it as, that's where we get into the statutory language, which once it's set, you won't have the option of saying you're not going to grant, unless it says may. It says may, but I'm wondering if that really was an intentional word or if it was just a word that got put in. We all know how language gets written when you're writing a bill. So, the board may grant exemption, the board may grant exemptions or an extension. It might not have seemed like a big thing at the time, but I'm just wondering.
That was language that the board agreed upon and was submitted. There have been several technical changes to the bill language since
Right.
we submitted the original proposal, but that was actually language that the board agreed on.
But did they agree on it, or did they just agree on it, or did they have a discussion about granting extensions for continuing education requirements?
I distinctly remember that staff afterward had an oh smoke moment. Because.
Right. That's what I thought.
We were wondering, okay, we get requests for exemptions now, but extensions we don't have. So I'm not sure
For CE requirements.
for CE requirements. So I'm not sure what the impetus was, and there wasn't a lot of discussion around it, but I
Uh-huh.
do remember those two words were clearly put into the proposed bill language and now is in the bill. So we've been talking about timing-wise. We do have our board meeting in July 27th. August 16th is the last day for fiscal committees to meet, and our bill's on its way to Assembly Appropriations. So some of the approved course provider kind of technical language, we can work with the committee staff on that now. But for like extension or exemptions, if it pleases the committee to make a recommendation to the board at the July meeting, we can relay that. And there was one other issue. 5 activities, because right now there's only 4
Right.
CPD activities
Right.
in the bill. So we would want the 5 to be relayed in the
Right.
bill as well. So those are more substantive policy
Right.
discussions that the board will need to have.
But it
at the
sounds like
July
the
meeting.
board, though, already had that discussion about extensions or exemptions, and the question, I guess, would be whether or not you're going to go back and ask the full board to rethink that. As a staff person myself, I mean, I know that my job is, once the board decides on a policy issue, my job is to make that happen. So we could, that's why I asked about whether it was an intentional thing or not, if it was kind of like a, oh yeah, extension, exemption, what's the difference?
No, I don't
And the
think it
staff's
was
going,
what's the
"Oh, there is a
difference,"
difference.
but I think maybe we weren't putting the same kind of eye to it as we are here. The fact that it says may, again, does this allow us the latitude, and let's keep it in, and then we can have it for a board discussion later. You know, we don't have to
I-
rush or anything.
I think
but
that-
we don't- we're not required to,
No, but I think if you have a word may in statute,
yeah.
if I were a psychologist and looking at that, then I would want to know, if you may grant an extension, why won't you grant me one?
It is going to, obviously, as you know, it's going to be subject to the discretion of the board, and we'd have to figure out if there's circumstances under which it would be appropriate.
Right,
to
and you have to have
grant
criteria and so
That's
forth
right.
that the board would use to grant or not grant an
And
extension.
I would hate to, I personally would hate to give away the opportunity to grant extensions if we can figure out arguable grounds under which people would need to get an extension or that we'd be able to grant an extension.
And it may have, and I
It
don't,
benefits the licensees.
yeah.
I'd prefer that it stay, personally prefer it stays in the statute.
Right, I think options are always good. It may have come about, and I don't recall, but it may have come about, going back to our earlier conversation about the fact that if a person, for whatever reason, and this has happened, it ends up that they did not meet their CE requirements, and it could have been through a mistake, or it could have been through, they thought this, I remember one case that this person thought, when they enrolled in a modular course that started in 1 year and finished in another year, they thought all those credits were going to count in year 1, and they didn't get the credits until year 2, and they didn't understand that. They thought they could take the credits for the half of the course that was in this year and get the other half in the second year. So it might have been that instances like that have created a situation where really right now there is no flexibility because there is no extension, and it wouldn't be an exemption. That doesn't, that wouldn't count. So I can see why it might have happened, and so then it just becomes, like you said, a case of, if that's kind of how it happened, then it would become a case of just developing a process for
And we
handling.
could extend the compliance date to meet the end of the full course if we felt that was an innocent error.
Exactly.
So I imagine
Yeah.
there could be circumstances
Yeah, I
where
see.
we have to have the
Yeah.
discretion.
Okay, thanks. So it sounds like we're okay with what's there. That doesn't hamper us in any way, and it gives us a chance to talk about it more fully, gives y'all a chance to think about it as well, and bring any kind of ways that you can see to our next licensing committee meeting, and then we can proceed. So I think we want to, I think maybe I'd like to say, let's not do this section about exemptions or extensions right now, because we don't know what we might come up with or what it might look like. And if we go through now and we only have exemption, then we might change it later or whatever. So, does that skip this section? Y'all okay with that?
We'll
Okay.
come back to it.
Okay, great. So, I think we're almost there, folks. I think we're on our last section here. And 1397.67, renewal after inactive or expired status. And we got another date here, so we just want to. It says it right now, it's 2018, but we don't know.
XX again?
We're just putting XX on any dates, depending on when this actually ultimately goes through.
Do you need to redo this one?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah,
Is this exactly as it is already stated? Because I can see something that I have a question about in this, I could ask about maybe.
Oh, I think the reason why we did this was until the regulation is changed, we don't have, in license lookup now, we don't have a delinquent status. We have an expired status.
okay.
So I think that's why, I'm trying to remember if that's why we changed it from delinquent to expired.
But do you need a new section to do then, or can you just change, do you need to make one not effective and then the next one effective, or can you just make changes to .67?
Oh,
Do you need a new section for it? I'm
I
trying
think
to,
that's why
and
we
then I guess
said,
the
do we
question
need
is,
a new
is
section?
there, like on, I guess the one you do on the new one, you are referring to CPD, which isn't above, so maybe that's one of the reasons, because it says CE courses?
Right.
Okay.
So what's the answer?
I guess the answer is yes, because if you're changing the model from the qualifying CE courses to the CPD model, which is in the second one, the one that's going to be effective with the new model, then you're better off having the two separate sections.
Thanks.
I think my question, and I think we've actually played with this before, and Mr. Thomas may be able to remember better than I, but on the second paragraph of B, where it says after a license has been expired for 3 years, the license is automatically canceled. I'm wondering if this is really the right place for this, and we've kind of discussed that before. It's a function of renewal and licensure as opposed to CE, and it seems like this is a strange place for it, and I'm wondering if it isn't better in 1381.9, which is, I don't think is in the
It's like a
materials, but it's in,
It's in
Pathways.
isn't it? Okay.
We talked about changing it to 2 years.
Yeah, we changed it to 2 years and.
Right.
1381.5, failure to pay initial license fee.
No, this is after a license has been
Yeah,
expired.
this is an expired license, the
Expired
2 years
That's
was the change for.
before the license is issued, and this is
Right, this is,
after it's
yeah,
issued.
an expired license, sorry. 1381.9, which is on pages 106 and 107 of the Orange Book. Does it maybe fit better there?
Yes, that's what we say.
Mhm.
The licensing committee said. But I have a question about that, just before you put it there. That second paragraph, it says, and successfully passed the licensing examination just as for the initial licensing application. Are we talking about the EPPP again?
Unless there's a waiver granted. Right. And I don't remember the sections on a waiver of the exam that may be included in this, I don't remember.
Okay, and so it's the licensing exam, and then, but what about the CPLEE? That's required too, right?
Well, when somebody has a passing score on the EPPP, they wouldn't have to retake the EPPP.
That's what I was thinking.
So I think
But we're
this
not
might,
talking the EPPP there.
I think it's just being generic so we can apply like whatever relevant licensing examination. For instance, somebody who may be licensed that from years ago that didn't take the EPPP. So I think that if they allowed their license to cancel, then we could require, under this wording, that they take the EPPP and the CPLEE.
So how about pass the licensing examination, parentheses S, just in case? Would that be all right? Does that mess it up?
No,
There
I
might
think
be
that's,
more than one.
I think that gives us the leeway to require the relevant examination or examinations.
So this just needs to be moved to 1381.9. This language.
So we
To,
use that.
to me, it makes, which I,
So on page 17, after license, so if you want to just do a comment box next to that, Jason, and then just put, move, not the whole thing.
Not the whole thing, just that paragraph.
Just that paragraph, sorry.
I mean, unless you think you need to explain to people that if your license, after 3 years, your license is canceled, then don't worry about that CE thing because you got bigger problems to worry about. I don't know. I think 1388.6, which are the license requirements and the waiver of exam. Let's see, it
What
says
page?
124 and 125. It's, I think A says when a California licensed psychologist has been licensed for at least 5 years and is allowed his or her license to cancel by not renewing for at least 3 years, a psychologist shall not be required to take the EPPP.
Oh.
So this would be true that they wouldn't have to take it if they'd been licensed for less than 5 years. I mean, then they would have to take it if they've been licensed for less than 5 years. So I think if you put the S in parentheses like you're just talking about, it would cover either situation, right? Where they somehow have only been licensed for 3 years and then let their license cancel.
Okay.
And then they would be subject to taking it.
But if they haven't ever taken the EPPP because of,
Because if they've been licensed for like less than 5 years, they would have taken.
Yeah, they would have.
yeah, they would have, yeah.
You mean less, more than
Well, if I'm reading this correctly, it says when they've been licensed for at least 5 years and then allowed their license to cancel, they are not required to take the EPPP. So if they were only licensed for 3 years and then didn't renew and it was canceled, they would have to take the EPPP, right?
That doesn't make
No,
any
Yeah.
sense.
we've already taken it because in the last 5 years, we've required all applicants.
Is that somewhere else?
We've required all applicants to have passed the EPPP. So if they've been licensed,
But so is that somewhere else? Because then, when I look at 1388.6 sub A, they're exempt from taking it if they've been licensed for at least 5 years.
Did we change the wording on this in our pathways to licensure?
I don't remember.
We haven't gotten there yet? Okay, okay. So, I
Unless
think we'll
it's
probably
covered
change.
somewhere else.
I think we might change this then in pathways to licensure, because that wouldn't be correctly or accurately reflecting what we want to do. Ms. Moore?
If that's, I mean, if you want to grant a waiver for a licensee who is licensed in less than 5 years, then that's a policy issue, you can do that. You're just gonna have to look at 1388.6.
Right, and we will do that in our review, pathways to licensure, so we might even put a note, Doctor, do you put a note there?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Joe Lindercrow, CPA. Just another note that you might want to add, and this is a question. In 1194, we're creating, hopefully, a retired license category. So how does I notice this part only refers to expired or inactive. So we might just want to make a note that if a retired license category is created, then what if a person wants to bring their license out of retirement, then that needs to be wrapped maybe into this as well.
Thank you. And that would go earlier too, I think, but yeah. And we might want to word 1397.67 differently too, because it might be inactive, expired, or retired, inactive, or inactive, retired, or expired, or something like that.
Right now, SB 1194 says if that retired license was issued less than 3 years prior to the application date, the application shall meet all of the following. And this is if they want to go back to active status. So they have to pay the fee, have to complete CPD, comply with fingerprint, a submitted application, take and pass the complete, pay all the fees, and fingerprints. No EPPP.
Well,
That's if they go on retired status and then 3 years later decide to go back to active. Within 3 years.
Yeah, that's fine. Are we done here with, I mean, we do have this one section we haven't done yet, but I mean, I think we're, okay, so now what I would like to do, I mean, we have some comments that were included in the packet, and I mean, I do think we need to address them or whatever, but what I'd like to do is ask just now in a global way, is there any more public comment on the continuing professional development? Dr. Shore? Do you want to take a little 5-minute break? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break.
I'm hoping I
5-minute break. And so if you would you please introduce yourself and then before you make your comment.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Karen Shore in private practice in Santa Monica. And I did bring some materials to hand out, but I think I've already burdened you a lot with reading materials, and I'd like to be able to, if I might, over the weekend, cut it down, maybe send it to somebody, and today just leave you with 1 page. Would that be okay? Okay, and I'll let you know when this 1 page is relevant.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So first I want to thank you for allowing me to address you today, and also thank you for, my behalf and many others, for allowing the limit on CE to be raised from 18 to 27. We really appreciate that. There were 3 items I was going to just add that are very brief. One of them you've already taken care of, and that was the self-directed learning. Very pleased to hear that. I also wanted to suggest maybe changing peer consultation to peer education, discussion, and consultation to reflect what I hope is going to be several allowable activities that I'm not quite sure, even with the new language, are included, like the book clubs, film clubs, special interest groups. So I'd still like some more clarification, being a little bit OCD, and I'm watching how you labor over words. Under professional activity, I might suggest creating a separate category called legal consultation for ethical and legal concerns, which would include calls to lawyers or insurance carriers, legal teams, and any APA-affiliated ethics committee, including those of CPA and our county associations. Those calls have direct impact on our work with clients and do help to protect the public. One goal I had, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt you,
Sure.
but I want to respond to you.
Yes.
First of all, reading groups or study groups or, getting together and watching a film, those are included in peer consultation. That's part of peer
Okay,
consultation.
if that could be stated somehow, I don't know if you want to, but at some point, just because it's just not clear, and
Okay.
we're warriors, so.
And what you just said,
The legal,
yeah, that would, I think, be under peer consultation.
well, it's not quite peer, because to me, what peer means is I'm just turning to somebody on my level. And if I call a lawyer, or like when I called APAIT because I had an issue, to me, that doesn't sound like peer consultation, and sometimes it's for a fee. So that's why I'm just suggesting that. But thank you. One goal I just had was to meet you and to have you meet me. I don't want to go in again to stuff that I've documented about what I consider lifelong dedication to learning. You've got it in the materials I've already submitted. I probably go much further than many other people, but I know there are people who do just as much, if not more, than I do. And basically just want to remind you of that, to let you know that I'm not protesting, and others like me are not protesting the cap on CE because we look to shirk responsibility, but because we believe that the ASPPB goals have in some way devalued or don't maybe see CE the way we see it. I'm not personally worried right now about meeting the CPD requirements, even if 2 or more categories are required, because I do partake in these book club and the special interest groups. I'm on 2 professional boards right now. One thing that does concern me is one of them is a multidisciplinary organization. I'm slated to be president of it. And when I read on page 2, item 3 under professional services, it says it means ongoing participation in services related to the field of psychology or other disciplines, but not, and including not limited to, but each time you mention serving on boards and things, it's psychological association boards. It's one other place where it says you're related to psychology or other related disciplines. It's there, but my preference, because I'm a worrier and many of us are, that it might say multidisciplinary or something like that when you talk about the professional boards. Another goal is, I do want to just speak as briefly as I can, which is hard for me, about the devaluation of CE. In that, the way I see it is that taking large and even huge amounts of CE is seen as insufficient to qualify for licensure. I believe that those of us who take very large amounts of CE have lived the very goals that ASPPB and you are hoping to achieve through CPD. Those goals are stated in the Maintenance of Competence for Literature white paper, and the guidelines for continuing professional development are to promote thoughtfully planned lifelong learning for maximal competence in one's area of practice, to protect the public by ensuring that psychologists remain current with new information and developments, and to reduce psychologist isolation. In the MOCL white paper, it says, CE as it is generally practiced refers to educational activities in psychology that are offered in one-time only workshop formats. Now, this may be true of many psychologists, but I emphasize that this is not how it is practiced by many of us. We do not use it as a one-time only workshop. I also refer to Marinopoulos 2007, which is in the other literature I gave you, where he outlines that their research of 68,000 citations, 145 review articles showed live media is better than print, multimedia is more effective than single media, multiple exposures are more effective than a single exposure, interactive techniques more effective than didactic, simulation methods effective for improving skills. The one sheet I do want to leave with you, and I'm not sure who to give it to,
we'll take it. Thanks.
Okay. It describes only my 2015 CE courses, which total 79 hours. I have, at this point in time, 123 for my current licensing cycle with 5 months still to go. And I'm signed up for several more. And I should have, if nothing gets in my way, 175 hours for this next licensing cycle. And this is just the 1 year. But what I want you to look at when you can is to see if it doesn't meet all the, both what Marinopoulos describes as effective, as well as the 3 main goals of ASPPB and the BOP. I'm not going to read that now. I generally do take about 70 to 100 or more CE hours in each two-year licensing period at great cost, because it's proven to me to be the best there is to increase my skills in both depth and breadth of knowledge. When you look at this, you'll see most of them are multimodal presentations, including things like being able to watch experts at work through their videos. In group psychotherapy conferences, we just had a 2-day workshop where there's an expert comes in, they do didactic, then they do a demonstration group right in front of us with 8 volunteers from the attendees. We discuss it, then we break into small groups, and you have the opportunity to be in a small group and or lead a small group. So it's experiential, it's viewing live right there, it's discussing with everybody. It's so multimedia and so experiential, and I just want you to know that these are the kinds of things that some of us do. Okay. The way that people like me use CE does not match ASPPB's statement that CE, as it is generally practiced, refers to educational activities in psychology that are offered in one-time-only workshops. Taking large amounts of CE also reduces isolation because every month, and sometimes more than once a month, we're meeting with colleagues with whom we study at these meetings, with whom we talk, because we almost always break down into small groups for discussion. And we also have the opportunity to meet new people many times a year because we're so often doing this. So we ask you for your recognition and support that the way some of us use CE meets all the goals that you're setting for us, and that support could be shown in the form of a CE-only option, even if you felt the need to require 40, 45, or 50 hours for CE only. Even though you still keep CPD at 36 for other people. That would be fine with us according to the survey that I did, where over 200 psychologists from California responded. Another goal I have is to talk a little bit about the unintended consequences of instituting the CPD proposal as written so far, and that might be a little bit different because of the self-directed learning. One unintended consequence was what seems to be a devaluation of CE as it is described in the ways that people like me use it. With the change, you've stated that the goal of increasing flexibility, as the guidelines acknowledge that people have different learning styles, and that flexibility is key in terms of helping ensure that psychologists are able to take advantage of the variety of ways that people learn, and thus how CPD credits can be earned. I agree that these increase flexibility for many, probably most, psychologists, but I do ask for whom is the model more flexible. I believe that the CPD proposal actually increases flexibility most for those psychologists who are likely to be in that bottom 25% that ASPPB is rightfully concerned about, and might be least flexible for 2 groups of psychologists. One, those who are thriving with and learning best from very large amounts of multimodal formal CE courses, and those who are having a few very difficult years. I'm going to skip some of the examples that I have. I can shorten them and submit them to you over the weekend or early next week. But one unintended consequence is the lack of flexibility for people who really, really thrive on CE or are having some very bad years but don't qualify for those exemptions. And very, when I talk about too much flexibility for some people, I think it's kind of painful that for those of us who take 70, 80, 90, 100, 120 CE courses, very focused both on our areas of expertise, learning new models. We use it to learn new treatment modalities, some of which we become certified in. But other people can get their licenses renewed with as little as 8 CE courses. And that's disturbing. That doesn't quite seem right. I outlined some very difficult years, and I stayed on one board and dropped other committees, but I did not contribute much to that board, other than going to the meetings. I couldn't, because if you may or may not have read it, my dad died, my mom's alone, I have to take care of her, I'm the executor, my daughter got cancer the next month, my cancer came back the month after that, and for a couple of years, we had a lot to do, and so I dropped a couple of committees. I stayed on the one board, but I didn't do much, and I have to say, it did not apply when you asked about applicability to practice. It didn't. It didn't, because I couldn't do very much. And I wouldn't want to lose my license over having a couple of very bad years. I still maintain my CE as best I could, because that's what I believe does the most for me. And I want you to trust that this is really important for some of us, that in bad years, that's what we least want to drop, for some of us, not for everybody. My last goal was just to highlight the current status of research on CPD and CE, and to suggest that it might be premature to place that cap. You can refer to my previous submission, but in brief, there's very little research as yet on the impact of CE on our work, but what there is shows that CE does have a positive impact on our effectiveness. There's no research within psychology that I could find that looks at the impact on competence of very large amounts of CE. And I am sure that one day, if we ever study the effects of very large amounts of CE in focused areas, the research will show that taking very large amounts of CE is not only helpful, but necessary in order to achieve expertise and excellence, not just competence. The MOCL white paper states, it will be extremely important that all stakeholders have confidence that the MOCL model is one that works, i.e. is valid, reliable, credible, and meaningful, and that the public is better protected through its use. Preliminary research shows that neither psychologists nor the public seem to support serving on professional committees and boards as relevant to competence, yet both groups do see formal CE, peer consultation, and self-directed learning as relevant. These results were the same in a sample of psychologists studied by Niemeyer, in which 40% had achieved ABEP. And that sample is a particularly high-achieving sample because in the general population of psychologists, under 5% have achieved ABEP. I'm asking that you not mandate activities that don't have empirical support as being necessary for competence, and not cap the one activity, CE, that does have some support and that has not been studied at all in terms of the effect on competence of very large amounts of CE. These changes and mandates will be on the books for many years. As I imagine, especially seeing what you go through, I imagine you're not going to want to revisit this topic for at least 5, maybe 10 years once you make your decisions. In addition to the 4 main goals I listed today, I wish to ask you just to go back at some of the other requests that I made for clarifications, some that I mentioned already. The additional activities that I mentioned, it seems to me that the included list of allowable CPD seems arbitrary in a sense and excludes many valuable activities which psychologists are actually engaged in, such as teaching undergraduate courses, providing consultation for a fee for licensed clinicians, taking consultation for a fee, becoming a reader or a chair of a dissertation committee. And there are several more things that I've thought of that I do think are good ideas and would provide a more true and respectful flexibility. I don't know if you've already looked at that part of applicability to practice. I did make some comments in the last one. I'm hoping you will delete that. That does feel very infantilizing, I'm afraid. So just a couple of conclusions, that well-chosen and thoughtfully planned CE is not simply continuing education for many of us, it's continuing training for some of us. I do believe, and I hope you'll come to agree, that it does meet ASPPB's and your goals that you want for us. Some of these CE programs, when taken in large amounts over a period of years, involve the ability to become certified in a new modality and really gain expertise. Adding the activities that I mentioned in my prior submission does increase flexibility and adds fairness, and will also bring, I believe, a better buy-in by psychologists when more of those activities are included. Leaving those activities out arbitrarily rewards some, but not other equally deserving psychologists. Please do also consider the needs of psychologists who strive to be highly competent, but have found a few very difficult years, and trust that well-chosen CE plans might be what they have found is workable and maximally educational in difficult years. And lastly, if we ever do perform relevant research, I am predicting that we will find that massive amounts of well-chosen, multimodal, formal CE, self-directed learning, formal post-degree programs, which I also am suggesting be included, paying for consultation and peer consultation on an as-needed or in an ongoing group, will prove to be the best ways to meet ASPPB's goals and your goals. And research is likely to find that the benefit of any particular combination of such activities will vary from psychologist to psychologist. Without empirical support and without research on the benefits of taking large amounts of CE, it seems premature to limit the amount of CE hours that can be applied to CPD. It seems better to increase the required hours towards CPD for a CE-only option than to cap it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. You know, as I hear you saying things, and again, we appreciate your comments, but I do want to say that some of the things you're bringing up, and so it makes me think, you know, let's just make sure it's clear in here, because a number of things you mentioned we do have in here.
Great. That would be great.
And so, thank you
Okay.
for that. Appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you very much. And who should I give this to?
You want to take it? Yeah.
Great.
Give it.
All right. Thanks.
She'll make sure we get it. So.
Dr. Shore, thank you very much for your comments, and we talked about your comments earlier, on your travel here, so thanks again. Those comments, though, I agree with you, Dr. Horn, make me think to make sure it's all clear.
Yeah.
But it also makes me think, as we said, for staff, it's gonna bring us back, the idea of how it could be implemented for extensions.
Right.
I feel like several times in Dr. Shore's comments, you mentioned about people having tough years.
Right.
And it's made me just think about that kind of idea, given the fact that we're gonna look at that in a little more detail. It might be worthwhile just thinking of some scenarios and figuring out how that would be implemented, particularly because we have may in the language now, just to think through that.
Right. Great.
I also wanted to mention that one of the things I think Dr. Shore highlighted in the materials that she submitted to us in advance was the fact that there was, in the exemption categories, a certain rigidity in terms of who would qualify for an exemption. And it almost have to be catastrophic in order for somebody to have to qualify for an exemption. So that's probably something we're going to revisit when we get back to that section. Thank you so much for coming, Dr. Shore.
Dr. Linda Crow, did you have something you wanted to say too?
Dr. Joe Linda Crow, I'm the CEO of the California Psychological Association. I first want to just say I really I'm very familiar with the work that the board and the committee are doing on these CE regs, and it's been ongoing for quite a while now. And I want to say it's clear to me that you're committed to providing clarity, more descriptive language, and I think it is a much improved document already, and I think that I can clearly see that that's your goal in terms of not being too burdensome in terms of documentation and so forth, and so I want to thank you for that. I want to just speak and it'll be brief, from the perspective not only as the CEO of the California Psychological Association, but as someone who has more than 30 years of experience in continuing education and continuing professional development. I have said many times that CPA fully supports the overall goals of the continuing professional development model. And I feel strongly that psychologists will respond very positively to this overall, to the broadening of the options that they will have in meeting their CE requirements. The committee's work on clarifying the regulations, as I said, will significantly improve the potential transition. And we have all agreed that we'll all work together once the board has approved changes so that psychologists can be very comfortable with any new plan. The only real point of contention at this point that I can see, really, is the cap on traditional or formal or structured or sponsor-approved CE. I suspect that you are leaning in the direction of maintaining the cap at 27 hours. I have gathered through many of the discussions that you may be concerned that psychologists will fail to take advantage of these additional choices that the new model would offer. I believe, based on the many conversations that I've had with our members, that you're wrong in that assumption, and that your licensees will eagerly participate in the new categories of CPD. But I do want to bring you feedback from a large number of our members, and Dr. Shore is one of those, I'm happy to say. So I am urging the board once again to consider retaining the option of earning all 36 hours of CPD through what we would consider traditional continuing education, traditional CE courses. You have heard from many of these psychologists who prefer this method of learning, and also from those who, as Dr. Shore pointed out, for a variety of reasons might find these other kinds of activities to be a bit out of reach. This does seem to particularly affect very experienced psychologists who have completed their time of actively participating as a volunteer, in writing, in publishing, attending conferences, or teaching. All of those things are no longer easily available to this group of senior psychologists and others who might have other restrictions on their time for various reasons. Also, you've heard the argument that this is the way that some people learn most effectively. And with what we know at this point about adult learning, it does seem counterproductive to force an adult professional to participate in learning activities that might not really be the best learning activities for them. If you leave the cap for traditional CE at 36 hours, those who learn best in this way will be able to keep learning that way. It's a very small accommodation, but it would be hugely important to a subset of your licensees. If you find over time that psychologists are not broadening their experience as you had hoped, you could consider changes at that point. We ask, though, that you start from the premise that psychologists themselves are best suited to direct their own learning, and that they will make good choices for themselves and their patients by choosing CPD programs and activities that are really best suited to their professional needs and to their learning style. I believe, and we believe that your confidence would be well placed. And so as you begin to get toward the end of wrapping up these revisions to these regs, I would ask you to just consider this option before you make your final recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Linderkirk. Dr. Emos?
I know Marilyn Emos, CDCR, that I've talked a lot about this, and I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'd like to reinforce what my colleagues have said. Dr. Linda Crow works with a lot of our people as well. As you know, we did a survey, and we came up with quite a broad band of enthusiasm for various parts, but we also did have a subset, quite a large subset of our population of psychologists at CDCR who do say that they learn better through traditional sponsored CE, and would prefer that and would prefer not to have a cap. So I did, however, notice in the results of the survey that we did that there were a lot of people, particularly earlier career psychologists, we have quite a number of those, who were very eager to participate in other types of CPD and maybe have the possibility. Again, we also have geographical restrictions in the prison system where a lot of people are in remote areas, other people not at all, for example. So all of these things are going to be playing a role for us. Also, a flexible view of this would be very advantageous, and we would also like you to consider that. But thank you very much again for the great work you're doing. We appreciate it, and I am very happy to take that back to my organization.
Thank you, Dr. Emos. Any more public comment on this CPD or any more from the committee? All right, then I think our discussion on CPD at this moment is over, for this meeting is over. At this moment for this meeting. Okay, yeah. So I do want to say, so it's 3:30, so we can still go. How long are you going to be here, Ms. Jones? When do you have to leave? Pretty soon? Right now? Okay. Okay. I mean, you know, I think we have time, and so Dr. Phillips had to take an emergency call, but he'll be back probably when you leave, but we'll break if he's not back yet when you leave. So what I'd like to do is move back to agenda item number, what is it?
8.
What is it?
Is it 8?
8, thank you.
No, I can take it.
Agenda item 8 and page.
When yours ended up here,
I was going to say, that's what I did. No, I have copies of everything that you drive. I don't have what you did yesterday.
So, do you have exactly where we?
Really?
Okay, so we're at 1388 on page 27.
Do we want to continue with the examinations, or did we want to go back and start with the pre-licensing courses that was skipped past? I don't think we had made a decision on where we wanted to start.
Yeah, you can see
It's
that.
going to probably be a
yeah.
lengthy discussion going through the coursework,
Uh-huh.
whereas the advanced may not be as
Right.
lengthy, so.
Maybe we would want to put the coursework off till later, because I think we want to think about that also in a broader context, so, yeah. All right, we're at 1388 examinations.
And just to frame the discussion here, this section was changed effective January 1, 2016, when the board went from a CPSE and complete offering to just the complete. So that's the framing of the section.
Okay, so board should be capitalized here or no? Or is this, okay, so everywhere board is, that should be capitalized.
We're trying to get the language up here.
Oh, okay.
Very well.
All right, I'm sorry, let's just wait then. We lost our.
We need to.
So this is the.
We'll figure it out.
While we're getting that ready, just in preparation for reviewing this section on examination, Mr. Thomas, has Ms. Snyder had any issues with the TOEFL or the requests for accommodations or anything? Has this structure had any issues, or has this been, in your experience, working with our examination coordinator, has the experience been positive since the change?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any issues, except we did have one applicant who did not meet the criteria, the scoring criteria, and basically wanted to retest. Do you remember that, Maureen? And so I think the outcome of that was that we do not accept tests within a certain time frame of each other, so you can't just keep taking it until you fail it or pass it, whichever way you want to look at it. But that was the only issue that I recall on the English as a second language.
Do you know if we've had a number of people who were asking for this? Do you know?
I don't know how many, but I know we've had at least a couple.
Well, usually you gotta wait for the thing to come out.
I'm wondering, should we consider including how good a TOEFL certification score is good for or
How long it's good
accepted
for?
by
Yeah.
the board?
Well, I think actually, the test company
Mhm.
often has, this is
Like a
how long.
validity.
Yeah, validity, yeah. So they'll say it should be good for 2 years or 1 year or whatever. Right.
Yeah. Why does it not work? Yeah, well, open up the budget. And it would be. That would be the actual, because that's yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, what are you doing? Oh. I don't know why it's not opening on the other one, because maybe it's still involved. Thank you, Jackie.
It's right on your right side. Okay.
Thank you. So we'll just copy it on yours and see if it goes on there now.
On the website, it says scores from both the TOEFL and the International English Language Testing System exam are valid for 2 years from the date of the exam.
There you go.
Right, but what if somebody takes an exam, takes the TOEFL, and gets a non-qualifying score?
It's a valid score for 2 years.
It's a valid score for 2 years then. But I'm thinking we should make that clear in regs.
It's valid for 2 years, but yeah, I think we need to clarify in the regs that you can't take the TOEFL within like 2 years of each other. In other words,
You have to wait 2 years.
it's valid for 2 years for us to accept it, but I think we need to clarify that you can't take it again in 6 months and try to get a lower score. Because I think that was the piece that was missing.
Right. Right. Right.
Take my tissue.
Well, that is, what your knowledge of English is, the numbers you take the test.
Yeah.
It's probably a good approximation of how well you're speaking English.
Yeah. And
For
we
the
went,
band of time.
and we went at the lower end of fair or something. Categories.
So where it says the TOEFL must have been taken within the previous 2 years prior to application, could we tag on, and cannot be retaken?
Something about when we accept a score.
Okay.
Or a time frame that we accept a score.
And we will not consider non-determinative score because we will do
Or we could say 1 year, I mean, if you want to do it. I mean, even though it's valid for 2 years, we might,
Okay.
but, taking,
I guess we just need to catch up. I guess we just need to catch up where we're discussing, now that we have everything up and running.
We haven't drawn any conclusions yet.
Okay.
So,
cannot be taken.
so it's valid for 2 years, but if they want to take it again in a year.
Oh. Oh, I miss his life.
Or do we want to say the highest score they achieve is with the score that we consider.
Yes, ma'am.
You know what I'm saying? If they got an 85, pick an arbitrary number, and a year and a half later they get a 70, that's not very persuasive to me that their English skills have probably degraded that much in a year and a half.
Right.
And we did update the
But if they're right
request
on the
form.
borderline or
Okay,
something.
yeah.
Because of that situation, we did update the ESL accommodation request form to ask, excuse me, how many times have you taken the TOEFL in the past 2 years, if any? And then please provide dates and scores for each exam. So we are
Okay.
required to provide each score that they received
So
in the
Jeff,
last 2 years.
So I understand, Jeff. So if they, let's say they said 0, and then they take the TOEFL, would this service that they give the administrators the TOEFL send us all their scores, or just the score for that test?
Just the score for that test. So,
Yeah, so we don't,
This
there's no way
is-
of independently verifying that they haven't
Right.
taken the test before.
and it's signed under penalty of perjury, but it is what they provide
And
us.
that's fine, we do that with lots of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Okay. They have to retake it, yeah. So Ms. Sorick has some possible language. We've come back into session here. So.
After the TOEFL must have been taken within the previous 2 years prior to application, something to start from, alternative scores may not be considered if submitted up to 1 year from initial results submission? Is that?
Within
You said
a year.
Yeah, because they could, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Or within a year from the initial results submission?
Or the initial, or the date of the initial score,
Yeah, the date of the initial.
Okay.
The
Well,
date.
no, it depends, because they could have, we want to say, yeah, it would have to,
Within the date of the initial results submission?
it's not really their submission. If it's been a year since they took it and got a score, I think we are saying it'd be all right to, we'll consider that new score if it's been a year or more. Even though it's
Okay.
valid for 2 years,
Right.
we won't consider from, you know, inside of a year from your score,
Right.
not submission.
Okay.
Is that, I mean, why wouldn't the board say you would only consider the highest score received on any test taken within that 2-year period?
Oh, that makes sense.
or? I
Okay.
kind of like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
So where is it gonna
So
go in
it's
this
basically any
language?
score that is still good, essentially within that 2-year
It's
period.
H, lines 28 through 34 on page 27. That's
Yeah,
where
but
we are.
Where did you want to insert this? Is it-
So, the last sentence there, that's what's being changed, right?
The very last one.
I would, right before.
Yes. I mean, the next to last sentence. The TOEFL must have been taken, so lines 32 and 33.
We're changing that sentence.
No, we're
it's
gonna
right after that.
add a new one after it.
Okay.
And right after that, it says,
The highest.
Board shall.
The board shall only, the board will only consider the lowest score of any,
the highest.
I mean, I'm sorry, the highest score of any exam taken within that 2-year period?
Or any exam taken in the past 2 years.
Yeah, within that 2-year period, from the,
Within the previous 2 years.
Yeah,
yeah.
within the previous 2 years.
previous
Yeah,
within
previous
the
2
previous
years.
2 years.
That's good.
It's more.
That will, that's a good way to say it, yeah.
Yep, yep.
And that would need to be underlined.
What'd you say?
And it would need to be underlined.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if it also should say of the TOEFL examination. Maybe
Maybe
not.
TOEFL.
Maybe not. But it's-
Yeah.
Because it's the only one we mentioned.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I'm just saying, any examination sounds like,
Any examination.
I got 100 on my driver's test.
Okay. That looks good.
The total.
Of, not any TOEFL, of the
Taken
TOEFL.
within the previous 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So get rid of examination.
Oh, because it's that TOEFL examination.
Yeah.
It's a test.
Yeah. Test of English as a foreign language, so we can just say.
I don't know how our scores would be at this point.
So there's a universal big B board in that section.
There's several,
There's
big Bs.
5,
2, 3, 4, 5, yeah.
all the rest.
So on line 7, that page,
7 of the page.
because we're saying what the different licensing exams are, I think we need to add an S to examination. The licensing examinations shall
yeah.
consist of the EPPP and the CPLE.
Mhm.
Okay? So that's all I have for, we ready for page 28? Oh dear. Oh dear. Just my notes all over it. Sorry. So speaking aloud again. All right, I'm just looking to see what I have. So on line 11, I think we want to say, we're not waiving the exam, we're not requiring it to be taken again. It's not a waiver of the EPPP. It's, you don't have to take it again.
But couldn't you have, you could have a CPQ without ever having taken it?
No, you don't get a
Yeah.
CPQ unless
Yeah.
you, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's one of the requirements for it.
But you can have a license,
Right.
Yeah.
but you can be licensed in another state, Canadian province, or U.S. territory for at least 5 years without having taken the EPPP.
Can you be? Any more? No.
Anymore, I would say no, but we don't know how far ago they were licensed, how long ago.
Okay, so if they were licensed prior to the EPPP being given,
So this would be waiving the EPPP.
but only for a select few.
For those people who were licensed based on a doctoral degree for at least 5 years in another state, province, territory.
So not be required to retake the EPPP.
But they might not have ever.
They might not have ever taken it.
If they were licensed in another state, or territory, that's not required.
There's
and they want to move to California,
Right.
they may not have ever taken the E-Triple.
Okay, but again, we're talking about a very small number of people. Most of the people who would be coming, if they've taken the EPPP, we're not going to require them to retake it.
Right, most of them would have taken it already.
And so are we saying that you don't have to take it at all if you've never taken it? Are we waiving that just because you've been licensed somewhere else?
That's what that section is intended to, and
It is? Is that a good
because
thing?
the retake was just a recent addition, or not an addition, it's just recommended addition.
Right.
Right now, it's saying that they shall not be required to take it. So most of them, yeah, they'll already have taken it. Whether they passed it at or above our cutoff is irrelevant because we're saying that they don't have to take it.
Well, why are we saying that is what I'm saying. Are we, if they have the CPQ, they have taken the EPPP.
Yeah.
But these are people that don't have the CPQ. CPQ is the next one.
Okay. So now this is just based on a doctoral degree.
We are looking at
They've
B,
been
right?
licensed for 5 years, they have a doctorate, and we're saying you don't have to do anything else if you have those things except take the continuing education that we require before you come in the state?
No.
Under B, they do have to submit transcripts and experience,
Yes.
as opposed to C, where we say that holders of the CPQ are deemed to have met the educational experience requirements. Therefore, they don't have to submit their transcripts or verification experience forms. B, they,
Still have
the
to.
way it's written, they don't have to take the EPPP, but they do still have to submit education and experience.
Well, it doesn't say that. Do we just know that?
It doesn't give them that
Right.
exemption. It
I'm
just-
sorry?
It doesn't give them the exemption of not
This
submitting.
is just
Right, because
waiver of the examination, that's the
Yeah.
only exemption that we're talking about here.
But
Yeah.
we are waiving the examination also for those people who have not taken it the first time. Theory, it's possible.
That's what I'm
It
saying,
is
is
possible,
that what
yes.
we want to
Possible.
do?
It could, the alternative would be, shall not be required to take the EPPP unless they have never done so.
Right,
You could do that.
that's what I'm saying.
I actually, if somebody wants to come and stay to practice, I think they should
They should.
pass the EPPP at some point,
That's what I think.
Mm.
unless they're going to do these other.
If they've gone through those other things, that means they have taken it, you know? Yeah, it automatically means it, so. But basically what we're saying with B there is that because you've been licensed for 5 years in another state, and you have a doctoral degree that we deem is okay, then you don't have to take the EPPP.
that's what that's saying, and instead, if you, like Dr. Phillips was saying, unless you have never taken it, instead of adding that language, I think it'd be better off just to eliminate B altogether, because they would still have to be like in any other applicant can
yeah. Yeah.
submit their EPPP score to us.
And if
So-
they have a passport from another state, they're going to.
They'll just submit, yeah.
In any event, right?
Right.
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 But that's true of any applicant.
Any applicant, right.
So then that brings your question about
A, sub A, which is what we were discussing earlier.
Well, Sub A is a California licensed psychologist.
Right. So,
But it's the same theory, because they possibly may not have ever taken the EPPP.
But because they were licensed so long ago,
Right.
it wasn't required when they applied for licensure?
Right, if they've maintained their license.
Uh-huh.
And then this is saying if they've, actually, the way it's written, it's like if they were licensed in, I think the EPPP, we began requiring that in like 73. Is that right, Karen?
Yeah.
So let's say somebody was licensed in 1972, let their license lapse in like 78. And now they're reapplying. So they were 5-year licensed in California, and now they're trying to be licensed again. So this would be saying, yeah, they don't have to take the EPP. So they might have been dormant out of psychology altogether since 1970.
So maybe what we want to do is say, whatever was applicable in California at the time, that's what we would do. Because if it's somebody who comes from another state, maybe they didn't start giving the EPP till 1974, but we started giving it in 1973. So if we said something about whatever our rules were at the time. No, but the EPP went into existence before we adopted it.
Oh, there was an exam, and it was an essay exam.
Yeah,
But it was California only.
yeah. It wasn't a national.
It wasn't a national exam, right, but there was another exam that we accepted, which was our own exam.
Well, I think we,
Okay, let me just follow the logic of this through. Okay, so somebody's been licensed in California for 5 years. They may not have taken the EPP if they were licensed early enough along in the process.
Right.
They've allowed their license to be canceled and not renewed, right? Now they want to get a new license, so effectively, I guess they're getting a new license,
I
right?
think delete A and B.
Why do we need to say anything at all? If
Yeah,
they've
we should
taken the
delete A and
If
B.
they've taken the EPP,
it's not a
great,
problem.
it's not a
Yeah.
problem. If they haven't taken the
They gotta
EPP,
get-
If you don't want to waive the EPP, you
Correct.
don't need those two sections.
Yeah, I would delete
Yeah, I
A
think
and
we should
B.
take
I think we should take it out then.
Mhm.
If it's been lapsed
because we don't know.
And
how
they'll
long.
just-
that long.
That's
It
how
could
it
have
is
been
for
less
the
for-
retired status. I mean, just consistency speaking, if
Okay.
they go beyond the 3 years.
Right.
It's-
You reapply.
It's new
retake-
licensing.
It's a new license, so they have to
Right.
take the EPP, the
Or
whole.
or if they've taken the EPP and
Passed.
they've passed the EPP previously, then it's,
Right.
we don't
Then we
require
don't,
them.
then they're not gonna.
And
have to
that's,
do it.
so
Yeah.
you
So I
get it
get-
a case-by-case basis, which we will still need them to report their scores to us
Sure.
just to
Sure,
verify.
sure, sure.
So we'll.
So they just become regular
Regular
applicants
people
instead
who
of
let their.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes
to be
sense.
called out in 1388.6.
Right.
So in other words, if I understand correctly, once you've successfully taken the EPP, you're in.
Right, as long as it
Good for
met our cutoff.
Good for
Like if
everyone.
somebody took it in
Right, so successful by.
April of
Right.
'76, we established a cutoff score, California
Right.
board did.
Right.
As long as they met that, then, yeah, they're
Right.
they're
So-
golden.
So then I guess the question is whether or not the board is concerned about any currency in that person's experience, both for A and B.
What do you mean currency?
How, if someone with A, maybe they let it lapse because they just were doing something else, or maybe they went out to another state. But let's say they've been, they have been canceled for some period of time, at least 3 years. Do you care that they could come in and they're going to, I don't know what they're going to need to do, to tell you the truth.
I
At that
think I
point,
understand what
because
you're saying, Marie.
Because is it just the C plea?
Just a C
Because
plea.
they've already had their hours, I presume.
Yeah.
because
But
they've
do we
been
know that they
licensed.
have current knowledge of
Correct.
psychology?
Right, that's what the EPP tells us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we are requiring the CPLE or whatever we call it, because that's current on our laws and regs. But, yeah.
So I don't know if
I don't think we
if the
wanna
C
give
plea
them
is the only thing you feel like you need to administer in order to make sure that they're current, at least in laws and regs. I think the same is true for B. The person may have been licensed for at least 5 years, but it could have been 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You don't know that they are it doesn't say that they're currently licensed in that other state.
I don't think we want to give the waiver, but I'm not sure that we should allow old scores from 30 years ago to constitute a basis for saying that we're waiving as part of the application process, you'd have passed and scored 25 years ago, you don't have to take the test again. I wonder if we don't want to require them to take the test.
I think that would not be a good thing to do, because I think just kind of how it's handled, it's sort of once you've passed it, you've passed it.
Mhm.
And I think we have to look other ways now to see if they're current,
assess
their
their level of
currency.
knowledge.
Yeah, their currency. I
Right.
think you're right, their currency is what we want to assess at this point in time, because, have you kept up with knowledge and stuff?
Well, certainly, I'm sure the E-triple-P looks substantially different now than it did.
Very, yeah. And it's really based on, what people are learning now in school. And so I think that for us, if they pass the E-triple-P, at whatever the passing score was, the time they took it, that's good. The CPLE will assure that they are current in our laws and regulations. And then evidence, maybe we want some evidence. We have our own continuing education, which they're required to take before they can get licensed. But maybe we would have, we would want evidence of other, or maybe what we require is enough, I don't know. But I don't think the E-triple-P is the way to find it unless the person's never taken the E-triple-P. Does that make sense?
I'm wondering if we give an exception to people coming in from out of state for purposes of licensure, if they're currently licensed in another state, meet certain requirements, they get to just take the CPLE, right? CPLE, whatever we're calling it.
Whatever.
I never know exactly how to pronounce it.
I always call it CPLE, but
That's what I do.
I like that. I wonder if they have,
CPLE.
so does their license have to be current at the time that they apply to us?
For us to fast track them like that?
So they just have to have had a license at some point in the past?
For 5 years.
For 5 years.
But
If an
maybe we
applicant
should
has
have a
been
time limit on
licensed.
it where it has to be.
and it's really not a fast track.
Active for less than 2 years.
It's not a fast
Well, it
track.
has to be a current license, current active license.
Oh, it does have to be, that's what, no,
It doesn't?
Doesn't have to be current.
shouldn't it?
Oh, I absolutely think it should if we're gonna waive things.
We're not really waiving anything.
Well-
All we're saying is that they don't have to take the E-triple-P.
Yeah, right now, the only thing that it does, if they're licensed or have been licensed at some point for 5 years in another state, is it waives the E-triple-P, which you're saying you don't want to do.
Well,
It doesn't
yeah.
waive the education experience like the CPQ does, or the
Yeah, no,
National
they still-
Register. Those last sentences in there
DV.
waives the education experience requirements for those people. They don't have to submit transcripts or verification of their
ABAPs
experience.
and
And
But-
ABAP.
If I had a doctoral degree in Minnesota and got a license 30 years ago, and I practiced for 10 years, let's say more than 5 years, I practiced for 10 years, and then I stopped practicing, and I went to work for 3M selling tape, I don't know, whatever people in Minnesota do.
Post-it notes or whatever.
Drink coffee is what they actually do, since I'm from there, I know. And then I decided, I think I'll become a psychologist again, I'm moving to I'm gonna retire to Palm Springs, I think I'll get a license in California.
Mhm.
We're saying they're not taking the E-triple-P, they're just taking the CPLE, and showing us that they have the
See, I don't-
supervised.
that's not good.
I don't think that's good
No.
personally.
I
No.
don't either. But that's if they haven't been active. I mean, I think if they have been, if they are active and they just want to come here,
That's great.
that's fine, then, all the shortcuts and stuff. But if they haven't been active for a period of time and then want to reactivate and come here, I don't think it's a brand-new license.
Because if
I
they
don't
were a
think we ought to-
California, if they
So
were
you're
a
gonna take
California
the AAA.
licensee, we'd put them back through all those hoops again, wouldn't we, if they'd been lapsed?
We wouldn't require them to take the E-triple-P again.
It's same thing, just the E-triple-P, but they still have to meet the education and experience
And-
and, just like a new applicant.
And they have to meet the current requirements, so if something had changed, for instance, if somebody had an equivalent degree,
Right.
we no longer accept
don't
equivalent
accept that.
degrees, so they would not qualify for the California license.
Because it has to, so if they haven't taken the EPPP ever, then they need to take it.
So even if they're currently licensed in like
Not if
Minnesota?
they're currently licensed. I'm talking about the person, because currently licensed, they're being watched. That's different to me than having been,
Well, it means they've been in the field, they've done enough for the
Right.
board to continue to issue a license to them.
and most states do require,
Other than New York.
continuing education, except for New York, a couple of others, but continuing professional development or continuing education or stuff like that. So other boards require that, so I feel more confident with that. But I don't feel confident at all if somebody's been retired
20 years.
for 20 years or 10 years or, and then, or
And it's never
left
passed the
there
EPPP.
and has never passed the EPPP.
Well, okay, Jen, I'm just trying to see where we're going with this, but playing devil's advocate. If Dr. Phillips was licensed in Minnesota back in 1971, Minnesota didn't institute the EPPP until '74. He maintains a valid license throughout today, and he applies to us. He doesn't need to take the EPPP.
No EPPP in that circumstance.
In that circumstance.
But if they've allowed their
because he's
license.
remained active and.
Right, in that
and-
circumstance, you would say no EPPP. Okay, so then,
Do we want to just say current and B then, leave in B?
that's all that needs to be changed in B. I still think we can get rid of A.
Is currently licensed based on a doctoral degree in another state. For at least 5 years, the applicant should not be required to.
Yes, currently licensed and has been for 5 years.
Right.
Yeah. But what do we do with A?
What do we do with that?
So
think we could-
A is deleted,
I think we can strike it.
and then B becomes A, and it would be if an applicant for licensure as a psychologist is currently or has been licensed,
Is currently.
Currently licensed.
is
For at least
currently
5 years.
licensed for at least 5 years.
In another state, Canadian province, or U.S. territory.
Now, did you guys want to consider, because a lot of the discussion has been around opening it up to any other countries? Or do you want to limit it in this one because it has to do with waivers?
Yeah, this is a waiver.
Okay.
This is not
Yeah,
the
I
same
don't-
as
yeah, I
a,
don't
yeah.
think- yeah.
Okay.
We're talking now about different education, we're talking a lot different.
Okay, so is that wording correct?
Has been licensed. for
Yeah,
at
it
least-
doesn't really, is currently licensed for
And it
at
has
least
been
5
so
years.
for at least 5 years.
Is currently licensed and has been so for at least 5 years based on a doctoral degree. Is currently licensed in another state, Canadian province, or U.S. territory, and has been for at least
No, it
5
hasn't.
years.
Then you're dropping the doctoral degree.
Is currently licensed based on a
Then you're kind of splitting the relevant,
yeah.
I know where you're going.
Is currently licensed and has been.
At the doctoral level, why don't we say this, at the doctoral level,
For at least 5 years.
yeah, and has been, currently licensed and has been for at least 5 years.
In another state, Canadian province, or
another
U.S.
state,
territory.
yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay.
If you take that for at least 5 years, they shall not be required to take the EPPP.
We keep in
No, keep that,
5
yeah,
years.
don't be there. Oh, he's on there,
Huh?
He's on there, that's fine.
Yeah, we take out based on a doctoral degree there. Currently licensed at the
that
doctoral
was-
level, has been so
Oh, it was underlined, okay.
for at least 5 years in another state, Canadian province, or territory. Take out for at least 5 years. No, not
No,
that.
no, the one that's not underlined.
Line.
That one, and you just want to strike it.
Poor Jason, we've just,
Yeah, rid of the hard stuff, put in existing language, doesn't mean it's wrong.
Right there.
The applicant shall not
Be
be
required.
required to
Retake.
Take.
retake, or take.
take the, yeah, each of.
Yeah, because it might be take or retake.
Okay.
So it's take at the beginning.
Okay.
Okay.
We got
So people who are,
And then you can delete that comment.
Let their license lapse for a period, they're gonna have to take the EPPP.
Yeah. Right?
Mhm.
That's what we're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's gonna be difficult.
So anybody who is licensed in California and let their license lapse, they're gonna have to retake the EPPP?
Yeah.
Like an A?
No, only if they,
Beyond a certain amount of time, it's not just lapse, but lapse.
only if they
first.
never took it before, because if they were required to take the EPPP when they got licensed,
Taken it already.
then they've already got a
that's
passing
fine.
score on it.
Okay,
And we'll already have that in their file.
okay.
So we're
We're
only,
gonna require them
yeah, we're
to
only,
report their scores, or get their.
well,
Well, we
for
have-
California, we'll have.
We'll have their scores, yeah.
And if they never took the EPPP, those are the ones that we're really trying to capture by this, then they will have to take it.
So we have if someone who is licensed in Minnesota and they let their license lapse for 3 years and then they come to California, we'll have to take the EPPP.
If they haven't taken the EPPP,
Okay,
right?
Right,
That's
Okay.
what we're saying, yeah.
okay.
because
We're just not
then
gonna waive it, so.
it'll
okay.
just be a regular, they won't be applying under this
Okay.
section.
It's a
waiver
big-
they'll be applying.
It'll be just like any other applicant, have you taken the EPPP?
Okay.
Yes, then
What's
they
your
have to
score?
report their scores.
Okay. So Elizabeth Herman will be very happy.
Why is that?
She, remember she hated that one?
Oh.
Remember?
Who will be happy?
A woman, Betty, a woman that used to work for the board
Okay.
as a licensing analyst. She never liked that section.
Oh, really?
For the very reason that you changed it.
Yeah, we changed it.
It's like, so she's smiling right now.
Send our best regards.
All right, so now where are we? If it happened-
Um,
all right, we got that. If they have a CPQ, they're fine. They also don't have to take the EPPP or retake the EPPP, well,
So you had a question too about people less than 5 years, if they've been licensed less than 5 years. We were discussing that early, yesterday.
In another jurisdiction, they've been licensed for
Less than 5 years.
They won't get,
They would just be like a new applicant.
except they'll have an
They'll have
EPPP.
an
They'll have an
EPPP score.
EPPP
Yeah.
score.
But they're gonna have to go through all the hoops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's fair.
yeah, I do too.
That's what we make them do currently.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, now let's look, because are we waiving? If they hold a CPQ, they have taken the EPPP. If they hold a National Register, Health Service Provider certificate or whatever National Register gives you, they also have taken.
Okay, so help me understand CPQ, which I'm not familiar with.
Oh.
Do you get
I mean, they've also,
Okay, so with the CPQ folks, do you get a CPQ at some point in your career, and that CPQ is golden for the rest of your career?
you have to keep renewing.
You have to keep renewing it, so it'd have to be current. So who holds the current CPQ?
Well, you're not a CPQ holder if it's not current. You know,
Because all
in
we're saying
other
is
words,
they have to have the certificate of professional qualification, they might have one for 20 years.
no, they won't, because we get evidence of their CPQ, right? Don't they? I'm sorry, it comes straight from ASPPB, yeah, so that means it's current.
Are they all current that they send to us, or they tell us, so they will only do it if they, okay, well, I'm just
They
asking.
don't hold
I
it.
want to make sure we're doing this right. That's
They
why
don't
I'm
have a
asking the question.
CPQ if it's not.
They have to have a current CPQ.
Yeah.
If you get on the National Register, do you have to be current to be on the National Register? Or do you, once you're on there, are you on there?
I don't know how the National Register does.
You have to keep
I
paying
think you have to
dues.
keep paying.
Do you have to keep
paying,
upping?
yeah.
Okay.
Makes
How el-
sense.
How else would anybody make any money?
That's
Okay.
right.
Same
Why
with
would they put you in
CPQ.
the
We
right
need
direction?
to add to the currently licensed, because we say if you
I think we say, and are currently
Currently
licensed.
licensed.
And are currently licensed. So just take out the has been and.
Do they have to?
To get a waiver.
To be in the National Register, yes,
Okay.
and to also have a
And are currently
But
licensed.
doesn't the National Register verify that they're currently licensed?
I don't know.
I know that they don't require 5 years, that's why we had to
That's why
write
we
it
had
in.
to, we made them add it, yeah.
Because you'll notice that language isn't in the CPQ, because CPQ does require
They
5
do
years.
require.
I'd like to put.
But I don't think,
and are
you wanna add
currently-
it, I don't think it's necessary, but it doesn't hurt to add it.
But I don't know, the National Register checks every day to see people's licenses haven't expired either, they might.
They
That's
don't have
right.
as good of a system, you're right.
Yeah, so, and are currently.
But that would be the same with the CPQ. Do we,
They're currently licensed, you're right,
they don't, but I mean, like, just like National Register, they don't check daily, but
well, nobody checks daily, but anytime anybody, if they have a current CPQ, that means they're currently licensed. Whatever, all the stuff.
If it's repetitive and they are currently licensed, great. I just want to make sure, there's often a lapse between the services and the licensing credentials.
Okay.
Can I'm getting a tad confused, because I feel like I'm hearing it's like you don't have to because you already took it. So we don't have to give these people a waiver because they don't need one. I think what I'm not clear on is, under what circumstances would someone be required to take the EPPP, or retake the EPPP? I mean, who, I almost feel like we're maybe coming at it from the wrong way, because it sounds like, okay, we don't have to worry about California licensed psychologists, because they already took it. We don't have to worry
Not
about
all.
the people.
Not all.
that's why we're taking A out.
Okay, so no one, you were taking A out because if they took it, great, if they didn't, they have to take it.
Right.
Okay. So what about B?
B, if they are currently licensed in another state and have been so for at least 5 years, we don't care if they've,
Whether or not they took it,
whether they took the EPPP.
you don't care.
Right.
Okay.
Because they're currently licensed.
Right. Why don't you care, just out of curiosity?
I think most of the reciprocity between states is based on 5 years, and it typically doesn't require a retest. I mean, we usually waive a large number of requirements.
Well, we also know that if they're being regulated by another state, they have to keep up with the, you
Right.
know,
I mean,
those
they're
things.
gonna be
Seee and stuff.
current to the.
Yeah, they're gonna be current.
Okay.
So. It's the lack of currency and the fact that you didn't take the EPPP.
Okay.
That's what we're worried about, or that's what we want to address. But is that a waiver of an exam?
It could be
It
for
could
some
be.
people.
Yes.
It's gonna be a waiver for some people.
Because
That would
that's,
be considered a
I
waiver.
just want to know what waiver means, so, you know,
We're waiving a requirement.
yeah.
They may have already complied with that requirement, but we're waiving it as a
Okay.
requirement. That was inspired by Jeff's mime over there.
I'm always I have one comment though, like in what's now B and C, we're also waiving the documentation of education and experience. Do we want to say in 1388.6 waiver examination and education?
It's not
and
just experience, it's education.
education and experience, or do we want to not do that? I don't know.
License requirements and waivers.
Licensure requirements and
Could we
waivers?
just say waivers?
Oh, I guess it's licensure requirements and waiver of the exam. It already says that. Never mind.
But it's not really license requirements. It could be waiver of license requirements and examination.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
That's-
Oh, okay, that's,
I
yeah.
think it's just,
Or
Yeah.
waiver of examination. It's not, they don't
But
always
it's
get
all
it.
But it's
There
also
are
the
instances
educational.
where-
Yeah.
There's gonna have to do some requirements, but not others,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
They still have to meet all of the pre-licensure coursework
Right.
requirements and fingerprints and, yeah.
Right,
So waiver, I think, in front, huh?
yeah.
So change the title.
Title.
Change the title from license requirements and waiver of examination to waiver of license requirements and examination.
Actually, you don't even need to put examination, because that is one of the licensure requirements, so it's just waiver of licensure.
Oh,
requirements.
Yeah.
requirement, okay.
I like it.
Every word that we can delete.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
And then you go down to the bottom, although it's not only the EPP waive, but it's, there we go.
For E,
For E, although what?
So we want to take out that
It's
first
not just
sentence,
the-
or for, yeah.
well, okay, let's talk about the ABAP first.
Okay.
An applicant for licensure as a psychologist certified by the ABAP, as an ABAP, and has been licensed at some point based on a doctoral degree in another state. Do we want to say and is currently licensed?
we could
Yeah.
repeat the language from
Yeah.
D.
Okay,
Yeah.
instead
And
of
are
has
currently
been,
licensed.
Are currently,
Yeah.
so, no, the line above, where it says
Has
has been.
been.
Get rid of
Basically, you've
has
done a
been.
phenomenal job all day, but I can tell your focus is
Line
wavering.
down. So take
One
out,
line that, I just don't know. what
I would have a
the-
splitting
no, has
headache
been,
if I
you
were
were
you.
right.
Yeah.
Take out has been,
So delete has
Delete.
been,
and
put it in our
are
current.
currently.
Are currently.
that's
And
it.
underline.
Underscore.
Underscore.
Okay. That's fine.
We don't get very many of these, but I believe when we do, they're currently licensed.
I'm
Yeah.
sure they are, but just
Yeah.
in case,
Yeah.
maybe back 20 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And then they,
But, you know, ABAP also is now instituting a recertification.
so it's like, it's more like a medical board that
Okay.
you have to qualify every 10 years.
Every 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so now, did you want to look at the next section?
Well, I want to look at F.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We might just want to start it with an
Although some requirements
applicant.
are waived under this section, an applicant must file
Oh.
a complete application.
Yeah.
I like
Meet
that.
all
Yeah,
current-
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So take out E.
Yeah, we strike that too.
What'd you say?
What's that? What was that, Ryan?
I think it's more clear to show what you're deleting first and then underline.
Okay, so just cut and paste.
So cut and paste some of
Yeah.
those,
I know you have to do it in the one above. No, you'll have to, okay. Never mind. Don't worry, I'll,
An applicant for licensure is a psychologist who's certified by ABAP and are currently licensed and is currently licensed.
Who is currently licensed?
Yeah. And, yeah, who is certified and who is currently licensed.
And same with the C,
Yeah, yeah,
because
that's,
it's the same.
yeah.
Yep.
Didn't we say up top at the doctoral level, don't we want to say that instead of based on the doctoral degree in another state, da-da-da-da-da? I don't know where the doctoral degree is. So,
But it says based on a doctoral degree already. doesn't
Yeah,
it?
We're
we're taking
taking
out-
out based on the
Okay.
doctoral.
Oh,
Actually, based
oh.
on doctoral degree is clearer to me. but-
Yeah, but it's the way we have it written, it's modifying a doctoral degree in another state, Canadian province.
Okay,
That's,
so in the parlance, a doctoral level degree would mean a degree for, as a psychologist, where a doctorate is required in order to have a degree.
correct,
Okay,
which is,
because there are some states I know we could have master's
Okay.
level.
there's
psychologists.
one that
What
has,
is it?
it's West Virginia.
Okay.
They have master's level independent practice.
You know,
So other boards that offer
Doctoral
masters, that have master's level people, they are supervised in some way. They're called like psychological assistants or
Okay.
psychological associates, but it is an in degree, but they're,
It's like being a physician's assistant.
yeah, yeah. So in Canada though, master's level is independent practice. They're moving to all doctorate, but it's not there yet, so. That's what's happening.
Okay.
Licensed at the doctoral level is fine. That means it's based on a doctorate degree.
Okay. We all know what that means, it's pretty clear.
Okay.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Consistent wording.
Sure that it doesn't mean they were licensed when they had a master's wages subsequently.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, got it.
And it's also not a doctoral degree in another state. That's the
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, actually, that
Not
could
a
be
degree
confusing.
here.
Because they could be licensed as a psychology with a master's and have another doctorate in something else.
And something else, yeah.
Well, we have a large number of MFTs in the state that have doctorates, but they're not licensed under their doctorates.
Right,
They
correct.
call themselves doctors.
Yeah, which is true, they are, but they're MFTs.
Their MFTs are licensed as MFTs, and then they get a doctorate, sometimes in a program that's not approved for licensure, but they now have a doctorate, so they call themselves doctors.
A lot of
so-and-so.
times it is approved for licensure as a psychologist, but they don't.
Sometimes it's not.
I know, but what I'm saying is sometimes, but they don't take the E-triple.
Or they don't want to go through
Yeah,
the
so
additional
they're-
professional experience to get the license, or,
Right.
I mean, there's a variety of reasons to do it, I'm not trying to disparage everybody that does that.
No. There are a lot, this is why it's often confusing to the public, you know?
Right, because there's,
Yeah.
yeah,
Who does, you know, does
they may
what.
assume that they've got a.
Right.
Because it may be a doctoral degree in something other than.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
But typically, then, I don't think, typically, then, I don't know, but then ask them, oh, doctor, do you use it as a line, so.
Right,
I know
The
one
strikeout first and then the addition after.
strike out first.
Family, something like that.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so we okay
I
up
think
here
we're
then?
good with that section.
All right, any public comment? I think so.
We scared them all off.
Oh, do you want me to go be public? I can sit up there and be public for
Now,
you.
we may have some people watching, I just want.
We still might have people watching.
Does anybody have a scarf?
We
I
are
could
being
put
webcast.
it-
All right, let's move to the next page, 1389.
Oh, my gosh.
Now you're saying it. There shall be no reconsideration of the score received on the EPPP or on the CPLEE.
Okay,
All right, and that makes sense? I mean, there aren't mistakes in scoring or anything like that? I mean, what's this there for?
Well, they can have their, what's it called,
Rescored.
rescored,
Mhm.
their exam rescored.
Uh-huh.
But they can't,
Regrade or.
they can't argue that they should be,
Passed because they were so close to the.
right,
uh-huh.
exactly.
Missed it by one, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And the reason for that is blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we're just, it's like, you
Right.
got that score and that's the score that
Okay.
you
Okay,
remain
that,
with.
I mean, that makes total sense. I think that's,
Because we do get that.
yeah.
Yes, we do.
And I know there are people who I mean, I passed by one point. I don't often say that. I passed, yeah.
I don't think they gave, by the time I took it, I don't think
No,
they gave a
now it's
score.
just a scale score, but you know, I'm older than you.
So do we want to
I was
delete
the
B?
California score, I think, when I took it. Huh?
Are we
I
going to
didn't have
delete?
to write an essay, though. I took the EEE.
You didn't have, luckily,
I
you
didn't
didn't
have to
have to
take the oral examination.
I did.
You didn't have
I
to take
took
the oral?
CPS, I took the CPSE or whatever was.
Yeah.
It was the first version of the CPSE.
You lucked out.
Wow.
Okay, so nothing in the section shall be construed to deprive an applicant of his or her rights or appeal as afforded by other provisions of law.
Okay.
Okay, and so then there's a question, consider deleting this. And
Do we need
probably
this?
Ms. Marks, do we
Yeah, well,
need this?
That's Ms. Marks.
We tell them they can't reconsider, and then we're telling them they can.
But they can't, it won't be reconsidered, but they can appeal.
False hope.
Where does it talk about appeals?
Apparently another provision of law.
This just seems like throwaway language.
It
I know, we're all
doesn't
getting
need
It
loopy.
doesn't really mean anything.
It doesn't.
It doesn't
Because, I
mean
mean,
anything.
what are they going to appeal? They
Appeal.
can't appeal the score, they're not going to appeal, like,
We're not
questions.
We're not giving them extra protection by doing
Yeah.
this.
I mean, if they have another, if they have other rights and other.
Sections, and they can use that.
Can't take that away.
You don't have to
We
reference
get to
it.
reaffirm them,
Yeah.
do we?
So, get rid of A.
Okay, so then, in terms of reconsideration,
Yeah.
There's no A
we
then,
don't
yeah.
put an A there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Now we're 1390. What?
These are small.
Oh, okay, so
Mm-hmm.
this article may be cited and referred to as a registered psychologist regulations, or we're gonna look
We're
at,
stakeholders.
yeah, psychological associates. Do we have to say this right here? 1390, this article may be cited and referred to, is that how we do it usually?
Yes.
When we talk about people, or?
Well,
Okay.
Do you want to
even
put
in,
a comment, just say psychological associate?
Do you
Yeah.
want to put it in, put it over in the comment? Yeah. Makes sense.
Huh?
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I think it's good. It makes it clear they're not a psychologist.
Their only
Associate.
concern I have is that psych assistants refer to themselves as PAs. And if you have psychological
But so do
associates, they'll be
physician
PAs.
assistants.
And physician
Yeah, right.
assistants.
And there's the APA and the A little p, big A.
I don't know what psych assistants those are.
And the legislature refers to it as PA,
Uh-huh.
psych assistant.
Oh, yeah, they do.
Yeah. It was in the bill analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Forget after this bill.
But an associate psychologist.
But they're not a psychologist. That's what we want to get away from,
Uh-huh.
so.
And a registered psychologist.
Assistant
Now they have basically practicing as a psychological assistant. What are they?
They're associate.
They're practicing actually with a little more latitude.
They're,
Well, they have to have a doctorate degree where psych assistant is master's,
yeah.
and they do have to have 1,500 hours of qualifying experience.
so it's only at the postdoc level.
It's
So it's only
postdoc.
postdoc,
So,
right?
to some extent, it's, because associate to me sounds a
Right.
little bit better than
It
assistant.
does, yeah, it does to me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
You say
that's fine.
postdoctoral psych, or no.
Psychological associate, you're a little higher than.
They're losing the
Yeah.
registered psychologist themselves.
Okay, so any person desiring to register at a qualifying agency, and we still have the agencies, right? As a, we'll just put in for right now, psychological associate shall submit an application on a form provided by the board.
Mhm.
Applications for registration that have not been completed within 9 days after additional information shall be deemed to be withdrawn.
Mhm.
Person meeting the requirements set forth in whatever section of the code may register with the board as a, we'll say, psychological associate.
Oops.
That's a period at the end of that, right? There's no more there. The employing agency must provide the board with evidence of the requisite level of government funding. Is that in order to be registered?
Yes.
Okay,
25%
so
of
do we
funding.
want to say that?
In order
I
to
think
be
it's
registered.
implied.
Implied.
Okay. The psychological associate's authorized to function only in the agency to which he or she's registered, and only after a registration number has been issued by the board. Registration shall be in effect for a period of 30 months from the date of issuance, cannot be renewed, nor shall the registrant be able to register again to the same agency. That's good, that's Steve. Is that
Oh,
They keep putting me as JJ.
they're registered psychological associates?
They're just psychological associates.
Just psychological.
But do we want to
But they-
continue to
yeah,
call it
but
registered?
They're gonna register, yeah. Yeah, I don't know why. Thank you, I'm glad you asked that. What is the reason for this?
So it doesn't
Because
have a
it's-
terminal occupational position?
Because it's always been.
But it is a terminal position, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I never really understood why either.
Yeah.
But why limit, since it's not non-renewable,
It's non-renewable.
so why limit it to 30 months?
Shall be in effect for a period of 30 months from the date of issuance.
So as far
period.
as the reasoning behind not registering to the same agency, I don't know, but why not say that they can be registered for longer than?
Well, I think the 30 months was because it's a postdoc
That's just a
placement where they're
postdoc
collecting their
position.
postdoc hours and they had the 30 consecutive months.
You can't be a registered psychologist or a psychological associate for the rest of your life.
Right.
We don't have, yeah.
Not yet.
Well, you could get another registration, I guess. You could move from.
Could you move?
But can't we do this like we do we're gonna do the psych assistant? The registration goes with the.
We
Oh,
could.
they can't, they have to, it has to be because it's to an agency.
It's to the
that
agency.
gets
It's to
that
the
kind of
agency,
funding.
right.
Yeah.
But
So we have yet to put a cap on the total amount of time you can be psychological associate /
You could do.
So
the-
someone could job hop to a different qualifying agency and not have any cap on the cumulative total.
Yeah.
Maybe making it consistent with the other sections.
We gotta cap
You
it.
do, and I think we have, currently, we have 72 months, but the proposal is to be 60
60.
months. So it's
60.
5
Not
years
to
for
exceed 60
exempt
months?
settings,
Yeah.
psych assistants, and psychological associates.
Yeah, but psych associates are only postdoc, and we don't give postdocs 5. We only give 30 months for each 1,500 hours.
30 months per agency.
They could go to another agency and do another 30 months.
So they could go to another qualifying agency and register.
No, but I know that's the way it is right now, but if this
Right.
is a postdoc, what I'm saying is if it's a postdoc, in our grand scheme of things, you have 30 months to complete your postdoctoral experience,
Mhm.
not 60 months,
Right, but what if they?
Unless you get an extension.
unless you get an extension.
Well, they could continue
They-
getting those positions though,
Right.
and say, oh, I'm accumulating hours now in my 7.
Well,
But-
just like psych
But
assistants.
aren't we gonna keep track of this? I mean, when they send it in, don't we keep?
Oh, yeah,
track?
we checked to make sure that they were properly registered, but just like with psych assistants, the problem that we were experiencing with psych assistants is that they were registered as a psych assistant, but they'd already accrued all their hours, their testing.
So
and
we have to
testing.
say this is terminal. This is meant to be training, right?
We need to cap it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we need to cap
I'm
Need to cap.
wondering if you'd have the same issue with the
Psychological associate.
associates as you would with the psych assistants, because they have received the degree, and I think that's some of the things that the committee is seeing with those people who are asking for extension is, please let me get the degree,
I don't think anyone has asked for a degree.
No, they haven't they've all been at the doctoral
No,
level already?
we had one that was an MA.
Do we have an MA? Okay.
Yeah,
So-
and she didn't
but
want to
they're
get
not asking.
her degree.
They haven't asked to finish their degree.
They didn't want to have to get a doctorate. Didn't want.
And again, I think even if they finish their degree, if they haven't done the other, it's not an underground license. We don't want it to be an underground.
Right, I'm just wondering with this, psych assistants, what's the biggest obstacle to their getting licensed?
I'm thinking
We know.
ACCC,
ACCC.
anxiety about testing,
Yeah.
avoidance. You can get very complicated
And I would just
are
not-
available now.
I can tell you from experience that we get very few registered psychologists that have multiple registrations.
Really?
They're usually in that nonprofit placement to gain their postdoc
To get
hours.
their hours.
And they're in the ECCC process usually. But I'm not opposed to a cap, just to catch those people, you know, and, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Just to be consistent with the,
So do we want to say, I agree,
Not
I
to
think we need a
exceed.
cap, and it's 30 months, that's as long as it can be. But do we want to say then, what if they leave one organization and go to, we can say 30 months total, but we have no way of, do we have a way of knowing that for sure? Well, I guess they can't be a registered psychologist.
for more than,
I mean, if we make them, it's when they reapply, if they want to be again or want to go to another agency, can we still count the hours? Or do we want to say, I mean, do they have to be 30 months in one place?
You start again, or?
We don't want it to, though. We want to end it.
the 30 would start again with a new registration.
The way it's done currently.
We want to limit them to 30 months total.
Just say you're limited to one registration,
You just get rid of two of the same agency.
just one.
30 months of date cannot be renewed. How about that, period?
Not be used nor shall there.
Oh, nor shall the reg shouldn't be able to register again to this.
You just get rid of to the same agency.
But what if they don't complete the 30 months?
Right.
My only concern is that
Why
they
can't
might
they
be
be-
getting into that position to accumulate their postdoc. They get their postdoc and then now they're in the, well, no, I'm talking myself out of it. Yeah, they're trying to get through the exam process and want to continue working, but
You could also go to an agency, have the agency lose their funding and kind of go
Right.
underground and want to continue to do it.
Yeah.
So you should be able to have multiple registrations, but maybe the cumulative total should be.
That's right.
30
That's what I
months
think
or
we want.
36 months or something.
or something.
It's 30 months is what we allow for
Okay.
each 1,500 hours. We can give
Okay.
extension, you know, but,
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, but so we want to talk about, it's a registration. Are we saying everybody who becomes a psychological associate is, you get it for a period of 30 months, period?
it can move with you to different, maybe nonprofit, well, we have to be able to make sure the nonprofit
Yeah,
qualifies,
we
yeah,
have to make sure
yeah.
it's a nonprofit.
So it does have to be a new application for each.
So we'd have to just
registration.
monitor how long they've been registered with the other
We would have
agency.
to, yeah, have that information, because if they go somewhere else to finish, maybe they only are 15 months in one place, and then they go to another place.
Mhm.
Um,
I mean, we'd be able to just find out the termination date of their first registration, and we know when those are issued, and we know if they've had a previous one.
So maybe we ought to say this somewhere earlier, this is for accumulation of postdoctoral hours. This position is for accumulation of postdoctoral supervised professional experience at a qualifying agency. And then that way, we've identified it as a training place.
We could kind of mirror the language that's in 2913, but apply it to the psychological associate. You could say, a psychological associate can perform psychological functions in preparation for licensure as a psychologist only if the following conditions are met. And then, the registration can be no more than 30 months. It has to be in a qualifying agency. So you lay out the criteria. Does that make sense?
That sounds good to me.
We lost our committee.
I think we have to wait because our committee's not here
Oh.
right now.
So do we have a quorum? There's supposed to be 4, and we only have 2. Let me ask Jeff really quick.
I think we can use this position registered. We have to stop when you leave.
I know that, but we need to stop this.
Okay, so we have to stop at 5?
Yeah,
Or do-
I'll just stop at 5, because I've got a 6:20 flight.
Okay.
They're saying we should be there 2 hours in advance for the holiday.
Okay, well then, maybe what we want to do is stop right here, okay? I think we're done. For right now, we're gonna pick up here, let's just start at the, we're gonna start on page 29
Okay,
with, let's start with 1390.3, because really that's where we start having problems, okay?
so do you want us to rework it and kind of mirror 2913 and list them out like Antoinette was?
If we can, yeah, well,
Okay.
in a way that we can, that would be
Okay.
great.
Okay.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind putting a comment. Yeah, that'd be perfect. Just mirror 2913.
So, because we haven't finished this, I'm thinking now ahead to the board
Mhm.
meeting coming up. Because we haven't finished this, I don't think anything needs to
Nope.
change before it goes to the board meeting. But because we have gone through CPD,
Mm-hmm.
we haven't looked at it finally though, and we want to look at it finally. So, it won't go to the board either.
Maybe in November.
Well, definitely it'll go in November.
Was there,
Yeah.
was there a section that
Yes,
the CPD?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for waiver,
I think forward,
extension.
forward planning, we probably can have a one-day licensing committee between the August meeting and the November meeting
Yeah.
to finish CPD and pathways. It's optimistic, but I think we can do it.
Yeah,
And then present to the board in
In November.
November the CPD language. The
Oh.
pathways will then go to
Stakeholders.
stakeholders after the November meeting,
Okay.
okay.
if that timing-wise makes sense.
Mhm. And if we don't finish it for the November meeting, we'll just keep going, but we're okay, yeah. But I think we'll definitely have the CPD ready to go. But I think a one-day meeting should do, don't you, Dr. Phillips?
I do. And I don't think,
No, it was just one of the ones that we brought.
These are long, yeah.
They are, but we were very productive under your chairpersonship, so
Thank
thank
you.
you very much.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
That was a
Thank you
good-
for your wonderful comments.
Got a lot done.
everyone.
It was much
Okay,
better than I
so
thought it would.
we don't have to move to adjourn, do we?
Yeah. Not to,
Shall I just talk about the future agenda items?
Thank you.
That I have written down?
Yes. Would you read to us what the future agenda items are? Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so for the suicide risk assessment language, staff will provide a synopsis of the May 2nd licensing committee discussion and draft new language with the inclusion of the one-time CPD requirement to present at the next licensing committee meeting for the November board meeting. And then at the next applicable board meeting, there will be a final draft without strike-throughs to bring to the full board for the pathways, in addition to the stakeholders meeting. And then for 1387.1B8, staff will draft new language to require the distribution of this pamphlet. It's the Therapy Never Includes Sex, I think is the title. Professional therapy, yeah. And then 1387.4A3, defining the term substantial. What are the California requirements? Defining what the basics are.
the substantial, yeah.
And then, let's see, the next licensing committee meeting discussed the options to allow for an extension. And then I also included that we'll try to schedule a one-day licensing committee meeting. And that's all I have.
Well, and also we're gonna look at 1387
Right,
and organizing that,
right,
yeah.
okay. So, anything else, Dr. Phillips?
It is kind of shocking how much stuff we got through in 2 days. I'm proud of us.
All right, anything else anybody can think of? Then, meeting's adjourned.
Happy